The daughters of Cain were never meant to walk this earth. Born from the bloodline of humanity's first murderer, they carried a darkness that clung to everything they touched. While most biblical stories focus on righteous bloodlines, today we uncover a far more unsettling legacy, one God allowed to grow, only to let it collapse from within. What made these women so dangerous, so potent, that their very lives threatened the world's destiny? What ancient secrets did they bear, buried deep in Scripture's shadows for thousands of years? This is the forgotten tale of the daughters of Cain. Before we begin, like and subscribe if you're new, and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Now then, let us begin. In the quiet and forgotten margins of ancient memory, there lies a story rarely uttered. Behind the familiar tales of Adam and Eve, of Noah's Ark and David's victory, another saga hums beneath the surface. It's a tale woven of exile and forbidden beauty, of cities forged in defiance, and daughters born beneath a shadow. This is the chronicle of Cain's descendants, a bloodline that strayed and ultimately fell. We know Cain as the first to spill human blood, the brother who murdered Abel in a lonely field outside Eden. But how many ask what became of him after? Where did he flee? Whom did he love? What legacy did he leave behind? The Bible offers hints, fragments scattered like shards. But tradition and oral lore fill the silence with wonder and with dread. Cain's children built the very first city. They shaped tools no one had ever imagined. They crafted the earliest music that echoed through the valleys of Nod. But behind this creativity was a curse that lingered, threading through every generation. Their daughters, it was said, were the most beautiful to ever live, so captivating that angels abandoned heaven for a chance to be near them, so irresistible that they sparked a cascade of events leading to the world's unraveling. Though forgotten by most, this lineage left fingerprints on the very fabric of civilization. They gifted humanity with agriculture, with metalwork, with architecture and music. But along with these gifts came arrogance, violence, and a pride that defied heaven itself. This is a story where radiant brilliance cast the longest shadows. East of Eden, in the desolate expanse known as the land of Nod, Cain's descendants multiplied. They thrived, building wonders that even God could not ignore. Yet with every new generation, they drifted farther from the garden, slipping further from divine grace, until even the earth itself cried out for reckoning. The women of this line became legend. Ada, the gentle spirit; Zillah, fierce and unyielding; Nama, enchanting beyond measure. Though their names appear only briefly in sacred texts, their influence shaped empires. Kings vied for their attention. Warriors clashed for a glimpse of their affection. Angels fell from heaven, seduced by their presence. But for all their majesty, they were daughters of a cursed man, born into a bloodline judged by God, raised in cities built on guilt and blood. Their story begins in exile, and it ends beneath floodwaters. But between those moments lies a tale of marvel and darkness, of wisdom twisted and power misused. A tale that flirts with forbidden knowledge and the cost of stepping beyond one's place. The scriptures whisper of giants walking the earth in those days, the Nephilim, born from the union of celestial beings and earthly women, many of whom came from Cain's line. Infused with divine strength, these offspring became the mighty of old, the heroes whose names thunder through legend. But they were also omens, living warnings of an age spiraling into ruin. This is their chronicle, the full unraveling of a lineage doomed from its origin. From Cain's anguished exile to the towering waters that erased his legacy, we will trace every step. We will walk their streets, hear their songs, witness their ascendancy and their fall. Some parts of this tale may inspire awe, others may chill the soul, but all of it reveals something eternal about power, beauty, and the terrible cost of walking away from the light. Come with us now. Let us venture east of Eden into the land where the first exile carved a kingdom from barren dust, where daughters sang melodies so haunting they made angels weep, where the roots of the world's first destruction were planted in soil watered by the blood of a slain brother. The first exile, Cain's curse. The blood of his brother still clung to his hands when the voice of God called his name. Cain stood in the very field where Abel's life had been taken. Abel's sacrifice had been accepted, while his own offering lay rejected and abandoned. The anger that had once burned through him now gave way to something colder: fear. A creeping, suffocating dread wrapped itself around his heart like fog at daybreak. "Where is Abel, your brother?" The voice came not from one direction, but from all places at once. Gentle, yet terrifying. Cain knew this voice well. He had heard it in Eden, in the hush of the garden's cool breath. But now, it bore the unbearable weight of judgment. Cain's reply came quickly, too quickly. "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" His words dropped into the silence like stones. They held no power. He knew, of course he knew, that God saw all, knew all. Still he lied. Still, he tried to veil his guilt in defiance. But the truth had already begun to unravel him. Beneath his feet, the ground seemed to pulse as if alive, whispering what Cain wished to hide. God had heard its testimony. "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the earth." The words struck like lightning, cutting deeper than any blade. They pierced through Cain's fury and reached into the hollow void where once his soul had sung. And so the curse fell upon him, swift and unrelenting. The very soil that had soaked up Abel's blood would yield nothing for Cain. No matter how he labored, no matter how carefully he planted or prayed, the earth would only mock him. He would become a fugitive, a restless wanderer without home, without harvest. Then came a fear unlike any he had known before. Not the sudden jolt of terror, but a vast and terrible dread, the horror of seeing your life stretch forward into endless exile. "My punishment is more than I can bear," Cain cried out. "You drive me today from the face of the earth. From your very presence I shall be hidden. I will be a fugitive, a wanderer across the land, and anyone who finds me will kill me." Yet even in divine judgment, mercy stirred. God placed a mark upon Cain, not a scar of shame, as many would later believe, but a sign of protection. "If anyone harms Cain," God declared, "vengeance shall be visited upon them sevenfold." This mark shielded Cain from the wrath of others, though it could not shield him from the torment within his own soul. So Cain gathered what little he had left to carry, his tools, a sack of grain, a skin of water. He turned from the altar where his rejected offering had once lain. The stones had been scattered in his rage, and he would not rebuild it. He could not. The God who had looked with favor on Abel's sacrifice would no longer dwell in the life Cain was about to forge. With the sun climbing above the horizon, Cain walked eastward. Each step carried him farther from Eden's fading glow, farther from the garden where his parents still tended its peace and mourned their two sons. One buried, the other lost to a wilderness beyond God's nearness. The land ahead was called Nod, wandering, a name fit for exile, a name that would mirror Cain's future. Here, in this vast and empty stretch of earth, he would begin again. Here, he would plant roots without grace. Here, his children would rise. Here, his daughters would be born into a world where God's voice was nothing more than a distant echo. That first night of exile, Cain made his camp beside a narrow stream. The water tasted bitter, or perhaps the bitterness welled up from within. He looked skyward, and the stars seemed dimmer than he remembered, farther away, as if even the heavens had turned their faces from him. And in the silence, he began to form a plan. If God would not bless his efforts, then Cain would extract blessing through cunning and will. If he could not be the faithful son, he would become the powerful father. His children would not kneel before a God who showed favoritism. They would carve their own way. They would define their own destiny. The mark on his forehead pulsed, not with pain, but with warmth. It protected him, yes, but it also marked him as separate, as other. His children would inherit that difference. They would be radiant and dreadful, gifted and cursed, forever walking the edge between wonder and destruction. When the sun rose, it brought no comfort, only the urge to keep moving. But something inside Cain had shifted. What had been despair only yesterday had now hardened into fierce resolve. He would not simply endure this exile. He would overcome it. And perhaps, in time, God would see that he had favored the wrong brother. The land of Nod met Cain's steps with silence. No birds sang in its thin trees. No flowers brightened its dry paths. But it was a place that waited, a place where beginnings could still take root, even if they were born in sorrow. Here, in this land that held its breath, the first city on earth would rise. Cain wandered for many days before he came upon the place, a wide valley where two streams joined, forming a fertile delta. The soil was not the deep black earth of Eden, but it was workable. If coaxed and broken, it might give enough to sustain life. He built his first shelter swiftly, for walls of stone and sun-baked mud, a roof of woven reeds. It was not majestic, but it held against wind and rain. As he worked, his hands remembered things: how to place stone upon stone, how to shape mortar that would hold. Lessons learned in Eden still lingered in his flesh, even if the God of Eden no longer walked beside him. Soon, others arrived. Like Cain, they were wanderers, outcasts carrying secrets and sorrow. They had heard whispers of a man building something new in the eastern wilderness. They came slowly, a hunter first, then a shepherd, then others, all of them drawn by a vision of something different. No one asked about the mark on Cain's brow. They accepted him, and the settlement began to grow. From scattered huts, it became a village. Then came the traders, caravans discovering food and shelter in the valley. Then the craftsmen, hearing stories of a place where skill mattered more than blood, where past sins could be buried beneath what your hands could build. When his first son was born, Cain named the boy Enoch. The name meant dedicated, initiated. A new beginning, a second chance, a child untouched by the garden's shadow, a child who would never hear God's voice in the wind, a citizen of a new world, shaped not by grace, but by defiance. As Enoch grew, so did the village, and Cain made a decision that would outlast his name. This would not remain a camp of wanderers. It would become something enduring, something the world had never seen before. Cain would build something the world had never seen. He would establish the first true city and name it after his son. The task consumed years. Every inhabitant of the valley lent their hands to the effort. They carved stone from the surrounding hills. They fired bricks in kilns that burned both day and night. They dug foundations deeper than anything humanity had ever attempted. This city was meant to endure. It would stand as evidence that mankind could shape something magnificent without needing the favor or blessing of God. The streets were laid out with careful precision. Houses rose in neat, ordered rows. A central square formed the heart of the community, a place for trade, gatherings, and discourse. Massive walls enclosed the entire city, thick enough to repel any force that might come against them. At the center of it all, Cain constructed his own palace. Not solely out of pride, though pride was certainly part of it, but as a statement, a bold declaration that here, in this place, the human will could reshape the world itself. The city of Enoch became a wonder, a place of marvels. Stories of its grandeur traveled across distant lands. Tales were told of its symmetrical streets, its prosperous markets, and its expert artisans crafting goods finer than any seen before. Trade poured in through its gates like water channeled through carved stone. Its treasuries overflowed with wealth. Its libraries filled with knowledge gathered from far and wide. But amid all this growth, something essential was absent. For all their construction and cleverness, for all their innovations and success, the citizens of Enoch had made everything except meaning. Their city had no temple. Their lives had no spiritual center. They had turned their backs on the God who had once exiled Cain, yet they had not found anything worthy to replace him. Cain felt this emptiness most clearly in the twilight hours. When the labor of the day was done, and the streets grew quiet, he would walk alone and hear the echo of his own footsteps. They had created something extraordinary, but extraordinary for what reason? To what end? The answer revealed itself to him, gradually. If they could not find meaning through worship, then they would find it through achievement. If God refused to bless their endeavors, then they would create works so astounding that divine approval would no longer matter. They would become as gods themselves, creators, shapers, masters of destiny. That vision became Cain's guiding force. It shaped every marriage he arranged. It directed the upbringing of his children. It inspired the technologies and philosophies his people pursued. The city of Enoch would not merely be a home, it would be mankind's first true experiment in separation from the divine. A trial of what mortals might accomplish when loosed from the boundaries of heaven. And that trial was about to begin. The sons and daughters of Cain emerged as a line shrouded in paradox. In the prosperous years that followed the city's founding, Cain's family flourished like a tree stretching towards sunlight. But this tree grew from cursed soil. Its branches bore fruit that was both sweet and bitter. His children were born into privilege, yet lived under shadow. They inherited Cain's creative genius, but they also bore the burden of his separation from the divine. Enoch, his firstborn, matured into a man of contemplative wisdom. He shared his father's vision for Enoch, but added patience and discipline to its pursuit. Under his leadership, The city evolved from a rugged settlement into a polished center of thought and artistry. Scholars came to study in its halls. Artists came to perfect their craft. The name Enoch became synonymous with human achievement, but the son, like the father, carried within him a hunger, a restless ache that no success could fill. He often wandered the city by night, searching for something he could never quite name. That yearning, that invisible emptiness, would pass to his descendants, a driving force that lifted them to greatness and led them into darkness. As Cain's bloodline grew, certain traits became unmistakable. They were astonishingly capable. They learned faster, built more cleverly, led more naturally than any others. But their pride was boundless, their tempers quick and violent when challenged. They were drawn to beauty with the hunger of those chasing light in a world of shadow. They chased knowledge with a passion that bordered on peril, and they used power with an increasing absence of mercy. Among them, the women were especially unforgettable. Their beauty was not merely physical, it was magnetic, a quality that halted conversations, swayed hearts, and redirected the course of nations. It was as if the divine spark their ancestor rejected had, in them, become something earthly yet no less radiant. Ada emerged as the first among these legendary daughters. Her name meant ornament or beauty, and she embodied both with haunting perfection. Tall and poised, her dark hair shimmered like rippling water under torchlight. Her eyes, full of secrets, drew people into their depths. She moved through the streets of Enoch like a melody made flesh. Men composed poems in honor of her smile. Women emulated her grace and fashion. Children followed her, drawn by her laughter and warmth. But Ada was not just softness. Beneath her gentle presence lay an iron will. She understood influence in ways that shocked even the most calculating men. While others argued policy behind closed doors, she shaped public opinion through the marketplace and domestic whispers. She knew which murmured phrases could destroy reputations and which subtle praises could elevate nobodies to prominence. Her reach spread like morning mist, seen by few, felt by all. Zillah, by contrast, burned like flame. Where Ada flowed like water, Zillah crackled with energy. Her fiery red hair shone like a dying sun. Her green eyes sparkled with intellect and defiance. She never hesitated to speak her mind and wielded her sharp wit like a blade. Men were at once captivated and intimidated. She cared little for their approval. Zillah did not work behind veils. She barged into council meetings without invitation. She voiced her thoughts without waiting to be asked. She challenged customs that confined women and carved out her own place when none were offered. Her fearless example ignited courage in others. More and more women began to question what limits they had been told to accept. But perhaps the most mysterious of Cain's daughters was Nama. Her name meant pleasant or lovely, but her presence carried something beyond either. She was as beautiful as Ada, as commanding as Zillah, but also cloaked in something ethereal. She seemed to shimmer between worlds, leaving many to wonder if she was entirely human. Her voice could draw tears from battle-hardened men. Her dances flowed with a rhythm that defied the laws of nature. When she spoke, even ordinary words bore unexpected weight. In gardens, plants bloomed more richly when she passed. Animals calmed at her touch. Some whispered that she knew truths mortals were never meant to grasp. Others claimed she could speak with spirits drifting between heaven and earth. The sons of Cain were no less exceptional, though their talents found other outlets. They became specialists, the first of their kind. One became master of animals. Another birthed music that had never before been heard. A third unveiled secrets of metallurgy that reshaped the use of tools and weapons. They were raised in a city that revered human excellence above all else. They were taught that every obstacle could be solved. Every limit could be broken. Every rule could be rewritten. The lesson was clear. Intelligence, when wielded with resolve, could conquer anything. And it often did. Until, eventually, it undid them. Their family gatherings must have been unforgettable. Halls echoing with music and laughter. Tables groaning beneath exotic foods hauled in by trade caravans. Voices rising with dreams of innovation and daring plans. Children played games that trained them to command futures of bold ambition. But even celebration cast shadows. They raised their glasses, not in praise of God, but in honor of their own accomplishments. They sang songs of triumph, not of faith or humility. They told tales of heroes who rose by force and cunning, not by sacrifice or trust. The children of Cain were being prepared to be great. But what kind of greatness? And what price would it demand? These questions would not remain unanswered for long. For among the many sons born to Cain's descendants, 3 would leave marks so deep that even time could not erase them. They were the sons of Lamech. and they would become the patriarchs of 3 entire professions. Their names would live long after their city fell, and their bloodline disappeared. They were Jabal, Jubal, and Tubal-Cain. The world has never been quite the same since the breath of these 3 brothers filled its air. Jabal was the eldest among them, a boy whose eyes always seemed to chase the horizon. While other children filled the city streets with laughter and play, Jabal wandered beyond the walls of Enoch into the untouched countryside. He studied the movement of wild animals across the landscape. He watched how they discovered water, how they found shelter in the changing seasons. He observed which plants they fed on, and which they instinctively avoided. To his family, he appeared strange. This son who preferred silence over speech, open skies over structured stone. But where others saw only wilderness, Jabal saw potential. The land beyond the city, he realized, could feed more than just those already living within its gates. Animals could be gathered and tamed, not merely hunted. Crops could be arranged in thoughtful patterns, increasing their yield and conserving precious space. As a teenager, he began experimenting, planting, tending, collecting. His father, though puzzled by his interests, allowed him the space to continue. Then came a brutal winter. Food stores in the city dwindled to almost nothing. Hunting parties returned empty-handed day after day. Merchants ceased their visits as roads turned impassable with mud and ice. People began to whisper fearfully, would they starve before the spring returned? But Jabal had prepared. His small herd of goats, carefully raised, provided milk and meat. His stored grains sustained dozens of families. His methods had saved the city. And from that moment forward, everything changed. Young men began to seek him out, hungry to learn what he knew. Families sent their children to his fields to study his techniques and tend his animals. What had once seemed like a solitary boy's eccentricity evolved into a respected profession. An entire way of life was born. Jabal became known as the father of those who live in tents and raise livestock. The nomadic lifestyle had begun. His younger brother, Jubal, followed a very different path toward greatness. Where Jabal found harmony in the rhythm of the wind across the plains, Jubal heard melodies in every corner of life. He heard music in the clinking of hammers in the workshops. He caught harmonies in the hum of voices exchanging goods in the markets. Even the percussion of raindrops on rooftops felt like notes waiting to be played. To Jubal, the world was not silent. It was a vast instrument, waiting for someone to bring forth its voice. His first creation was humble, a hollow reed with carefully carved holes. But when he blew into it, the sound it produced was unlike anything anyone had heard. It was no longer the random noises of nature, it was music, tones shaped with intent, sound given order. He continued experimenting with shapes and sizes. Each variation produced its own distinct voice. And when played together, these instruments formed harmonies that lifted the hearts of those who listened. Word of his strange new devices spread quickly through the city. Everyone wanted to try them. Jubal began teaching others how to craft and play them. He developed the first organized approach to musical instruction. Students learned scales and rhythms. They practiced together in groups, discovering that combined effort could produce music more complex and beautiful than anything one alone could achieve. But his greatest masterpiece came later. After years spent perfecting wind instruments, he turned his mind toward stringed sound. He designed a wooden frame, sturdy and strong, capable of supporting multiple chords under great tension. When he plucked those strings, the tones that resonated were pure, haunting, and infinite in their combinations. This instrument became his legacy, the harp, an instrument capable of expressing every emotion known to man. Music transformed the culture of Enoch. Evening gatherings turned into concerts that attracted people from distant lands. Religious ceremonies, though dedicated to human triumph rather than divine reverence, gained profound depth through the power of song. Laborers sang rhythmic chants that gave motion to their work. Children learned history and values through melody and rhyme. Jubal was honored as the father of all who played the harp and flute. But it was their youngest brother, Tubal-Cain, whose contributions had the most immediate and practical impact. His world was one of fire and ore. He mastered the alchemy of raw metal, transforming Earth's hidden elements into tools that could reshape human life. He started with copper, learning to extract it from rugged rock using fire and precise technique. But copper, while useful for decoration and simple tools, lacked strength. It bent too easily for real labor or war. Tubal-Cain's genius lay in his obsession with experimentation. He began combining metals, heating them at varied intensities, cooling them in different ways. Many of his attempts failed, but each failure taught him something new about the spirit of metal. Through tireless trial and error, he uncovered the secrets of bronze, a fusion of copper and tin, stronger than either element alone. Bronze changed everything. Farmers could till soil more efficiently with bronze plows. Stone could be shaped more precisely with bronze chisels. Warriors became deadlier with bronze blades in their hands. The expansion of the city accelerated rapidly, made possible by the strength of this new alloy. Projects once thought impossible were suddenly within reach. Yet even that was not his limit. His true masterpiece came later, when he dared to tame iron. Iron was elusive. It required even higher temperatures, more intricate extraction, and greater skill to manipulate. But iron tools surpassed bronze in every way. They were harder, held their edge longer, and expanded what humans could do more than any material before them. Scripture records that Tubal-Cain became the first true forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. Every blacksmith since then has unknowingly followed in his path. Every metal tool today still bears the shadow of his innovation. He handed humanity the tools to transform their surroundings on a scale never seen before. Together, these three brothers redefined civilization. Jabal taught humanity to cooperate with nature instead of dominate it. Jubal gave them music to express their innermost thoughts and connect as communities. Tubal-Cain gave them tools to turn imagination into architecture, into power, into permanence. They were the first Renaissance men, masters of the essential arts that would make human culture possible. But their gifts came with a silent cost. For the same talents that made life richer also made humanity more powerful. And power, when placed in hands that had turned away from the divine, would become dangerous. The sons of Lamech had armed their people with the tools of civilization. Whether that civilization would bless the world or destroy it remained uncertain. And yet, even among these men, no figure stirred the imagination like one of their sisters. Of all the daughters born to Cain's lineage, none shone with the strange allure of Naamah. Her very name, meaning pleasant or lovely, seemed far too small for the mystery she carried. Yes, she was beautiful, but in a family where beauty was abundant, Naamah possessed something more. Something that made even angels pause in their heavenly courses to gaze down upon the earth. She was born in the middle of a thunderstorm, a night so violent it shook the foundations of Enoch itself. Lightning streaked across the sky in patterns that some swore formed sacred words no man could read. The midwives who attended her birth whispered of signs and omens. The child had emerged without crying, her eyes wide open, already aware. The candles in the room flickered in a rhythm that matched the pace of her breath. And when she took her first inhale, the storm outside grew still. From the moment she drew her first breath, strange things seemed to follow Naamah. Her childhood was filled with moments that her parents brushed off with reason, but never forgot. Plants and gardens where she played grew taller and more vibrant than anywhere else. Sick animals, touched gently by her hand, would recover almost miraculously. Music boxes played unfamiliar melodies, even when unwound, whenever she passed nearby. Her siblings learned not to lie to her. She always seemed to know. Her parents quickly understood never to make promises they didn't intend to keep, for she never forgot anything. And as she grew older, the stories grew with her. Travelers returned from the markets with tales of a young girl examining exotic goods with impossible understanding. She could identify the origin of spices by scent alone, naming distant lands without hesitation. She knew which fabrics would absorb dye most deeply before any weaver had tested them. She selected oils and perfumes with a precision that baffled even the most seasoned traders. Yet Naamah's true brilliance revealed itself not in words, but in music and motion. Whenever Jubal crafted a new instrument, she was almost always the first to master it. Her voice could rise to piercing highs beyond human reach, then drop to low tones that seemed to stir the bones of the earth itself. She sang in languages that felt eerily familiar, yet no one could recognize. Listeners claimed they understood what she was saying, even though they couldn't identify a single word. And her dancing, it was something no one could explain. She moved in ways that seemed to reject the limits of the human body. Her limbs flowed like water, her steps passed like wind, her turns burned like flame. When she danced at public festivals, plazas overflowed with people. Crowds traveled from neighboring cities just to witness her performances. Some who saw her claimed they had glimpsed hidden truths in her movement, patterns that revealed how all things were connected. But for all her power, Naamah remained warm and accessible. She walked among the common people as easily as among nobles. Children adored her because she listened, truly listened, when they spoke. Elders sought her out because she never dismissed their stories. She honored them. Nama had the rare ability to make everyone she spoke with feel as though they were the most important person in the world. Suitors came from all corners of the known world. Princes offered her alliances that could have secured her family's position for generations. Merchants offered her vast treasures, rare spices, silks, and stones. Scholars arrived with scrolls and tomes of ancient wisdom. Artists created entire masterpieces in her honor. Nama received all of it with graciousness, but she accepted none of it. It was as though she was waiting for something or someone. When asked by her family why she refused every proposal, she would only smile and say, "The right time hasn't yet come." Some thought her vain or impossibly selective, but others suspected she was listening to a voice none of them could hear. Her influence, however, went far beyond matters of the heart. Nama became an informal counselor to the leaders of Enoch. She possessed an uncanny understanding of human nature. Her advice resolved disputes that had gone unresolved for years. She suggested trade agreements that opened new markets and revitalized commerce. Her ideas for city planning not only beautified Enoch, they made it more efficient, more livable, more enduring. But her presence began to attract attention from beyond the boundaries of the human realm. Strange reports circulated among travelers. The stars, some said, had begun to shift, moving in unfamiliar patterns when she walked at night. Animals gathered in odd arrangements, forming shapes that served no natural purpose. Weather seemed to bend to her moods. Clear skies darkened when she was troubled. A breeze would arise, soft and playful, whenever she laughed. Priests from neighboring cities, those who still worshipped their ancient gods, sent emissaries to study her. When they returned, they carried reports their masters could scarcely believe. This daughter of Cain's cursed line seemed to possess abilities that rivaled those of divine beings. She was human, but not entirely. She moved through the world as if the very force of life pulsed through her more intensely than through anyone else. She was bound to the earth, yet somehow not fully of it. These whispers traveled even farther, beyond the horizon of the mortal world. In the heavenly realms, beings of light and unfathomable power began to turn their gaze toward Nama. They observed her with growing interest. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was her otherworldliness that held their attention. She seemed to bridge the space between realms, a living paradox, neither fully of heaven nor entirely of earth. And that, more than anything, made her irresistible. The stage was being set for something the world had never seen, a crossing of boundaries no law had permitted. And Nama, lovely and enigmatic, stood quietly at the center of it all, awaiting whatever fate had prepared for her. The time of waiting was drawing to a close. High above, in the sanctuaries of heaven, unrest was brewing. Among the ranks of angels, a faction began to stir. They were called the Watchers. Assigned long ago to observe humanity from afar, they were never to interfere. They were forbidden to descend beneath the crystalline barrier that separated the celestial from the terrestrial. For ages beyond counting, they had kept to this mandate. But now, something had shifted. At first, it was subtle. Where once they observed with detachment, they began to linger over certain faces. Their focus narrowed. Their interest deepened. The daughters of Cain possessed a beauty that went beyond mere appearance. There was something about them that stirred the core of these angelic beings. Something that resonated with the divine spark within the Watchers themselves. They leaned closer, watched longer, strained against the limits of their divine commission. It was Azel, their leader, who finally gave voice to the thought that had taken root in all their minds. He was the most radiant among them, his presence majestic, his voice thunder-soft. "Why?" he asked during their secret gathering. "Should we be content only to watch? We are mighty, created in wisdom and strength, yet forbidden to use our gifts for those who struggle below." His words fell into hearts already ripe for defiance. Samjaza, second in command, nodded slowly. "They walk in darkness," he said, "while we hold light. They suffer in ignorance, while we hold knowledge. Would it not be cruelty to withhold what we could so easily give?" What followed was not mere discussion, it was a rupture. Beings made to serve, to worship, began to savor the thought of independence. They began to view their limitations not as sacred boundaries, but as shackles. Their divine roles felt less like purpose, more like prison. As they continued to watch the daughters of men, particularly those of Cain's lineage, their focus turned personal. They no longer studied humanity as a whole. They memorized faces. They learned names. They saw private moments. They watched joy and pain, hope and longing. And with that growing intimacy, desire followed. The women of Cain's bloodline seemed almost designed to captivate such attention, and none more than Nama. When she danced, her movements seemed to echo the very structure of the stars themselves. Her movements echoed the rhythm of constellations, the dance of stars across the heavens. And when she sang, her voice carried harmonies that reminded the watchers of the music once heard only in the spheres. She walked the earth, yet something about her was deeply familiar, as if within her mortal body resided some fragment of the celestial world they had left behind. With every passing day, the temptation grew. The watchers began to wonder what it might feel like to walk beside humanity, to feel dirt beneath their feet instead of clouds, to know the warmth of sunlight on skin rather than the cool glow of eternal radiance. To embrace these women, so beautiful, so strange, and share with them the hidden treasures of heaven. Finally, Azel spoke aloud what all of them had been quietly thinking. We could give them so much, he said. We could reveal wonders they've never imagined. We could guide them toward greatness, not from afar, but directly, with our own hands. Wouldn't that be a truer service than merely watching them struggle? The argument was compelling, even noble, in appearance. They told themselves that this desire to descend was not lust, but mercy. That their fascination with these women was born of compassion for their ignorance. That breaking a divine order wasn't rebellion, but a more enlightened form of obedience, rooted in love. And so, one by one, they made their decision. 200 watchers gathered at the summit of Mount Hermon. There, beneath the stars, they swore an unbreakable oath. They would descend together. They would take wives from among the daughters of men. They would share their divine knowledge and heavenly power with humanity. And they would face the consequences, whatever they might be. The oath was terrifying in its finality. Each watcher called down a curse upon himself should he ever abandon the others. They knew they were stepping over a boundary that could never be crossed again. But the desire below was stronger than the fear above. The descent began at twilight, as the veil between worlds stretched thin. One after another, they abandoned their stations in the heavenly court. They passed through the crystalline barrier that had always marked the edge of the divine. And for the first time, they felt gravity, Earth's invisible pull drawing them downward into the realm of flesh and time. Their forms changed as they fell. Their bodies, once composed of pure celestial light, began to solidify. They became beings who could walk on soil, breathe air, and touch the world. They were no longer entirely angelic, but neither were they fully human. Their arrival did not go unnoticed. Animals fled in instinctive terror. Plants wilted under the pressure of their divine presence. The very air shimmered and thickened around them. Among spiritually sensitive humans, a sense of disturbance rippled with hope, but for the daughters of Cain, the effect was different. These women, already marked by otherworldly gifts, felt a strange magnetism toward the newcomers. There was something familiar in these beings. The watchers spread out across the world, but many, irresistibly, gravitated toward the city of Enoch. Here lived the most beautiful women ever born. Here was the seat of human knowledge and invention. Here, they believed, their rebellion would yield its most lasting legacy. As they entered the city, walking among its crowded streets for the first time, the watchers were struck. What they had seen only from a distance now astonished them up close. The architecture, the music, the intricacies of human language and life. Human beings, they realized, were far more extraordinary than they had imagined. Perhaps their descent had not been a mistake after all. And yet, even amid the marvels of the city, the watchers noticed a void. Cain's legacy had produced brilliance, but without meaning. The people had severed themselves from the divine, and nothing had replaced it. Their lives revolved around invention and indulgence, but remained empty at the core. The watchers believed they could fill this emptiness, that their presence could bring purpose where none remained. And so, the stage was set. The most fateful unions in human history were about to begin. When the sons of God took the daughters of men as their wives, the course of creation itself would be forever altered. The era of distant observation had ended. The era of forbidden intimacy had begun. The mingling of divine and mortal had entered the world. When Azel first encountered Nama in the gardens outside the city, something profound passed between them. She saw in him a being of breathtaking beauty and impossible wisdom, whose very presence made the atmosphere crackle with power. He saw in her a woman whose mortal form held mysteries deeper than the stars, secrets even he had never known. Their courtship, if it could be called that, was like nothing the world had ever seen. Azel revealed to Nama knowledge that had been hidden since the beginning of time. He spoke to her of stars and their movements, how they ruled the tides and seasons. He taught her the properties of stones and plants, how they could heal the body or poison the soul. He showed her how to read the signs in the sky, how to track omens and the flight of birds. Nama absorbed it all with ravenous curiosity. She grasped ideas that should have taken lifetimes to master. Her questions often surprised even him, piercing through layers of wisdom that only the oldest spirits could understand. Together, they unlocked realms of knowledge that had never before been touched by purely human or purely angelic minds. But it wasn't just knowledge that passed between them. The attraction between Nama and Azel was fierce and undeniable. When he took her as his wife, their union ignited shockwaves in both the heavens and the earth. The ground beneath them pulsed with newfound energy. The sky lit up with unfamiliar colors, streaks of light no one had ever seen. Their wedding night was both miraculous and terrifying. Trees bloomed long before their time. Rivers veered from their courses. Mountains shook with distant thunder. Some rejoiced, believing they had witnessed the birth of a new age. Others cowered in fear, convinced the natural order had been shattered. And across the land, other watchers followed suit. Simjaza, second in command, chose Ada, drawn by her quiet strength and her sharp mind. Her beauty was softer than Nama's, but no less mesmerizing. When they were joined, the fields of Enoch transformed. Grain grew overnight to unnatural heights. New flowers emerged, dazzling in color, glowing faintly as if lit from within. Zillah, the fire-hearted daughter, caught the eye of Barakiel, the watcher of storms and lightning. Her fierce spirit mirrored his own tempestuous energy. Their union brought days of ceaseless rain. Reservoirs filled to overflowing. The land blossomed under their downpours. But this rain held strange properties. Those who drank from it reported sudden shifts, sharper senses, minds that moved faster. Some claimed they could speak languages they had never studied. The pattern continued. As more watchers took human wives, the world around them bent under the weight of these unions. Rivers flowed against gravity. Stones began to hum and sing when touched by the wind. Animals started speaking in human tongues. The laws that had governed creation since its beginning began to bend and blur. The weight of these impossible relationships began to reshape everything around them. The women who married the Watchers underwent profound transformations. Their already stunning beauty intensified to the point that looking upon them became overwhelming, almost painful. Their voices gained strange power, words that could soothe illness or, with equal force, inflict pain. They aged more slowly than others, as if the immortality of their celestial husbands had partially transferred to them. Some women developed abilities that could only be described as magical. They saw visions of events happening miles away. They could speak with the spirits of the dead. But the most startling changes were found in their children. When divine beings and mortal women conceived offspring, the result shattered every known law of nature. These children grew at unnatural speeds, reaching full adult size while still holding infant minds. They possessed strength capable of crushing stone with bare hands. Their intelligence unfolded in ways foreign to typical human development, brilliant, but alien. The first of these hybrid children sparked awe and terror in equal measure. They were breathtakingly beautiful, yet their beauty disturbed those who saw them. Something in their gaze unsettled mortals. They spoke in full sentences before they could even walk properly. They solved complex mathematical problems that stumped the most educated scholars. They painted and sculpted with a precision and elegance no human artist could match. But something was missing. They lacked the basic qualities that defined humanity. Love, compassion, mercy. These were foreign concepts to them. They treated ordinary humans with the same indifference one might show an insect. Even their childhood games ended in violence, often leaving human children seriously wounded. As they matured, people began calling them by a name that would echo through the ages: Nephilim, the fallen ones. Or perhaps more chillingly, those who cause others to fall. Their existence challenged everything humans believed about life, the world, and their place in it. The Watchers, now fully immersed in their roles as husbands and fathers, began to share even more forbidden knowledge. Azel revealed secrets of metallurgy that made Tubal-Cain's early advances seem primitive. Weapons appeared that could cut through any material. Tools emerged that could reshape entire landscapes with minimal effort. Simjaza disclosed agricultural techniques that far surpassed anything Jabal had discovered. Crops now grew in barren soil and bloomed in every season. But some of these enhanced plants were volatile, beneficial in tiny amounts, deadly in excess. Other Watchers revealed different arcane knowledge. They taught the art of cosmetics that could enhance beauty beyond natural limits. They crafted jewelry that imbued wearers with unusual powers. They shared medical knowledge that could prolong life, or end it, in precise, deliberate ways. Each new gift brought brilliance and danger. Enoch became a city of marvels. Its markets overflowed with goods so wondrous they seemed conjured from dreams. Its schools taught subjects no human had ever dared imagine. Its artists created works so powerful they made people weep or laugh uncontrollably. But beneath the wonder, a slow corruption was taking hold. The hybrid children, now approaching adulthood, began to assert themselves in ways that unsettled even their Watcher fathers. They demanded offerings from purely human populations. They seized whatever they wanted, without regard for consent or ownership. They treated the earth as if it were theirs by right. The women of Cain's bloodline, now mothers of these strange and mighty beings, found themselves torn between love and dread. They cherished their children, yet feared what they were becoming. They adored their celestial husbands, yet sensed the price of their rebellion was still unfolding. They enjoyed their powers, yet felt something sacred slipping away. In the celestial realms, the consequences of the Watcher's rebellion could no longer be ignored. The delicate balance between spirit and matter was unraveling. The divine order that had held the cosmos together since the beginning was being compromised. Justice demanded action. But for now, in the lands where the Nephilim walked and the daughters of men bore impossible children, the future appeared full of promise. No one yet foresaw the storm building in the heights of heaven. No one imagined that their era of triumph would soon become the prelude to the greatest catastrophe in history. The Age of Giants had dawned. The Age of Judgment was drawing near. Lamech, the violent heir. In the 6th generation from Cain came a man whose name would be remembered not for greatness, but for blood. Lamech inherited the pride of his ancestors and magnified it beyond measure. Where Cain killed in a fit of rage, Lamech turned murder into a calculated ritual. Where Cain trembled with remorse, Lamech boasted of his brutality. The curse that had begun with one brother's blood spilled in a field reached its full manifestation in this descendant, who made violence his legacy. Lamech grew up in an era of prosperity his forefathers could hardly imagine. The city of Enoch had grown into a thriving empire of trade and wealth. Caravans arrived from distant kingdoms. Craftsmen produced goods so fine they fetched premium prices in foreign markets. The techniques of Jabal, Jubal, and Tubal-Cain had matured into entire industries, employing thousands and generating immense profits. But prosperity without wisdom births rot. Lamech came of age in a society that measured success by accumulation and power by domination. He learned early that might mattered more than justice, that cunning outweighed compassion, that the true mark of a man was how many others feared him. His education was steeped in the forbidden knowledge passed down from the Watchers. He mastered mathematics that predicted the stars. He studied metallurgy that forged alloys stronger than anything seen before. He applied agricultural science that could force abundance from even the poorest soil. And he excelled in the arts of war. Lamech became a master not just of weapons, but of warfare itself. His first bloodshed came during a border conflict with a neighboring settlement. What began as a dispute over water escalated into a full-scale armed clash. While other young men served as foot soldiers, Lamech stood out for his ruthless brilliance. He spared no one. He took no prisoners. He left behind examples, ruins, and corpses that warned others not to resist Enoch's reach. His victory earned him fame in the city, but it also awakened something dark within him. Lamech discovered that he didn't just tolerate violence, he craved it. Not merely as a tool of politics for necessity, but for the power it gave him. The look of fear in his enemies. The feeling of controlling life and death with a single decision. This was the man who would carry Cain's legacy to its bloodiest conclusion. The knowledge that his will alone could erase another person from existence became a source of intoxication for Lamech. His appetite for violence deepened with every act. Soon, he no longer waited for conflict to find him, he sought it out. He led raids on settlements that had never posed any threat to Enoch. He attacked trading caravans transporting goods his own city needed, preferring theft and conquest over diplomacy or trade. He transformed war from a desperate last measure into a first and favored strategy. For Lamech, violence became policy. But his most significant innovation wasn't in tactics or strategy, it was in weaponry. While previous generations had fought with bronze blades, tools that required skill and timing, Lamech envisioned something else entirely. He commissioned Tubal-Cain to design a weapon that would shift the balance of combat, where victory hinged not on mastery, but on possession. The result was the first iron sword forged solely for the purpose of killing humans. It was longer than any blade the world had seen, sharper than bronze could ever achieve, weighted for swift strikes and devastating precision. In Lamech's hands, the weapon became almost mythical. He could take down multiple opponents with ease. He could slice through bronze armor as if it were no more than cloth. His reputation spread rapidly, echoing far beyond Enoch's walls. Warriors from distant lands traveled to challenge him. Most never returned. Those who did brought back tales of a man with supernatural reflexes and preternatural strength, a killer who seemed to know his enemy's next move before they made it. A man who had been born, it seemed, for nothing but domination through violence. But brute strength was never enough for Lamech. He needed the world to acknowledge his supremacy in all things. He demanded the richest foods, the finest clothing, the most extravagant home. He surrounded himself with servants tasked with praising him endlessly, reminding him each hour of his greatness. He commissioned sculptors to craft monuments to his victories. He paid poets to write verses proclaiming his unmatched strength and intelligence. His pride crested when he decided that ordinary marriage customs were unworthy of a man like him. Where others took one wife, Lamech would take two. Not for love, but as a declaration, proof of his wealth, a signal of his power. A message that he was not bound by the rules of other men. That choice would carry consequences deeper than even he understood. His selection of wives would introduce powerful new bloodlines into the house of Cain. The children born of these unions would inherit their father's violence, but also qualities from their mother's lines that would amplify both brilliance and destruction in ways no one could predict. Most troubling of all was Lamech's attitude toward his own violence. Where Cain had hidden his crime and begged God for mercy, Lamech turned killing into performance art. He composed a song celebrating his murders and performed it publicly. In it, he boasted of killing a young man for the minor offense of causing him a wound. He bragged about killing a child for nothing more than striking him. He ended the song with a proclamation: if Cain was to be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech would be avenged 77-fold. What had once been a curse had become, in Lamech's hands, a promise of boundless vengeance. That moment marked a spiritual collapse. Previous generations, even in their failings, had understood that murder was wrong. Lamech made it a virtue. He cultivated a culture where violence wasn't just permitted, it was admired, where the ability to harm others became the ultimate standard of worth. The impact spread like poison in drinking water. Young men began to mimic him, his tactics, his beliefs. Disputes that once might have been settled through counsel or compromise now ended in bloodshed. The city that had once been built as a haven for outcasts had become a beast, a predator devouring its neighbors. Even as Lamech celebrated his killings, even as his wives bore him children destined to carry his legacy, forces beyond his vision were gathering. The same divine justice that had marked Cain for his crime was now watching Lamech's pride. Heaven's patience was not eternal. A reckoning was drawing near, one that would make Lamech's iron blade seem as meaningless as a child's toy. But for now, he ruled without question. The undisputed sovereign of a civilization that had forgotten the line between strength and righteousness. His wives would bear children destined to shape the final pages of the pre-flood world. And within them, the very best and worst of human nature would be magnified to impossible extremes. The wives of Lamech, Ada and Zillah. Lamech's decision to marry two women was not born from affection, but ambition. In a society where power was measured in possessions, wives were a potent symbol. They represented not only wealth, since multiple households demanded great resources, but also virility, dominance, and social standing. For a man like Lamech, who made a name by breaking boundaries and pushing limits, monogamy was far too ordinary. His choices in partners revealed as much strategy as desire. Ada came from a family known for their mastery of agriculture and animal husbandry. Her lineage had advanced Jabal's original techniques, creating herds that thrived under any condition and crops that yielded abundantly even in poor soil. By marrying her, Lamech gained access to knowledge that would fuel his expanding empire. Ada herself was a woman of steady intellect and quiet power. She saw the long game, challenges not to be crushed but solved through patience. While Lamech reached for the sword, Ada reached for the plow. Her beauty was not showy but enduring. It revealed itself more with time, more with trust. She accepted Lamech's proposal with the same practical wisdom she applied to all things. Marriage to the most powerful man in Enoch would ensure her family's position, and give her children unmatched opportunities. She knew his violent nature, but she believed she could redirect it, that her influence might eventually turn his force toward creation instead of destruction. Zillah, by contrast, was fire to Ada's earth. Her family were metalworkers of extraordinary skill. They had inherited knowledge from the Watchers themselves, creating alloys stronger and sharper than any known before. Their tools and weapons were coveted throughout the region. But Zillah brought more than her heritage. She had a fierce mind, a quick tongue, and a will to match Lamech's own. Where Ada influenced through suggestion and steadiness, Zillah confronted directly. She challenged him openly in public forums. Their arguments were legendary, fiery, passionate, intense. They sometimes ended in violence, but more often, they ended in grudging respect. Zillah's beauty was vivid and commanding, the kind that broke silence when she entered a room. She wore her beauty like a warrior wears armor, as a tool, as a warning, as an invitation. Unlike Ada, who hoped to soften her husband's edge, Zillah sought to sharpen it, to hone his fury into a weapon more precise, more dangerous, more unstoppable. The two women could not have been more different in temperament or approach, and yet, somehow, they learned how to coexist within Lamech's household. Perhaps they sensed, beneath the surface, that their situations shared enough similarity to form an unlikely bond. Both were married to a man who valued them more for their usefulness than for who they were. Both were raising children in a world that increasingly treated violence as the only answer to conflict. Ada's response to this brutal reality was to carve out small spaces of peace amid the chaos. Her section of the household became a sanctuary, a place where children were taught gentleness, and servants could work without fear of sudden rage. She taught her sons to recognize and revere beauty. She taught her daughters to value true wisdom over mere cleverness or manipulation. Her influence moved slowly but relentlessly, like water wearing down the edges of stone. Zillah, in contrast, embraced the violent nature of the world and prepared her children accordingly. She trained them to wield both language and weaponry with equal precision. She taught them how to spot the dangers that hid behind smiling faces, how to strike without hesitation, and how to show no mercy once victory was assured. Her household pulsed with ambition, energy, and a drive to dominate. The contrast between these two women extended into every detail of their lives. Ada's chambers were soft and welcoming. Plants bloomed in every window. Birds built nests under her eaves. Children felt calm and protected in her presence. Her voice was quiet and warm, her movements graceful and slow. She exuded a quiet serenity that smoothed every room she entered. Zillah's quarters, on the other hand, exploded with bold colors and vivid shapes. Metal sculptures captured and reflected light from highly polished surfaces. The plants she kept were exotic, often sharp-edged or vividly colored, selected for drama, not peace. When she spoke, her voice cut cleanly through the loudest noise. Her movements were crisp and deliberate, like a dancer rehearsed to perfection. Being near her felt like standing close to a controlled fire, mesmerizing, but never without danger. And yet, for all their differences, the two women shared essential traits, qualities that had no doubt drawn Lamech to them. They were intelligent enough to grasp the dangerous political landscape they inhabited. They were strong enough to hold on to their dignity, even while being treated as symbols of status. They were pragmatic enough to work within constraints they could not change, but always searching for the small openings where they could shape outcomes that mattered. Their children inherited different mixtures of these maternal traits. Some leaned toward Ada's calm gentleness. Others embraced Zillah's intensity and drive. And some combined the qualities of both mothers in new, unpredictable ways. But regardless of personality, each child carried Lamech's legacy of violence, and the ancient mark of Cain's curse etched deep into their lineage. Over time, the relationship between the two women evolved. What began as silent rivalry grew into begrudging collaboration, then matured into something near friendship. They learned how to coordinate their influence over Lamech, presenting a united front whenever his choices endangered their children. They shared information, rumors, opportunities, dangers that affected the household. They came to appreciate one another's strengths, each recognizing what the other brought to the shared struggle of survival. And, perhaps more than anything, They realized they were living through a pivotal moment in human history. The world around them was changing rapidly. The forbidden knowledge of the Watchers was spreading. The power of the Nephilim was rising. Their children would inherit a civilization unlike anything humanity had known. Whether that inheritance became a blessing or a curse would depend, in part, on the wisdom these women passed down. In quiet moments, both Ada and Zillah questioned the paths they had chosen. Ada sometimes wondered if her gentle philosophy was enough, if her children would be prepared for a world growing more violent by the day. Zillah worried that her emphasis on strength and cunning might create something darker, children who were not survivors, but monsters. Yet both women had committed themselves to their families. They would raise their children with everything they had, and pray that love could somehow overcome the weight of the curses woven into their blood. The stage was set for the final act in the saga of the pre-flood world. The sons and daughters born to these two women would become the last generation of Cain's line. Their choices would determine whether that lineage ended in redemption or ruin. Ada and Zillah could not see what lay ahead, but they would do all they could to prepare their families for whatever future awaited them. Corruption spreads. Civilization declines. Something dark had begun to bloom in the hearts of Cain's descendants. What started as pride in their cities, their craft, their progress, slowly twisted into something more poisonous. The children of the first exile still carried their ancestors' restless spirit, but that spirit had found new forms. Violence was now common on Enoch's streets. Disputes were settled not with reason or counsel, but with bronze weapons forged by Tubal-Cain's apprentices. The music once taught by Jubal had changed. No longer soothing or celebratory, it grew coarse and wild. Melodies that once calmed the soul now stirred up darker emotions. Lamech's boastful murder song had become a tavern favorite. Young warriors sang it with pride. Fathers taught their sons that violence was strength. Mercy, they said, was weakness. Cain's mark, once a divine sign of mercy and protection, was now misinterpreted. His descendants saw it not as a warning, but as a license, a shield that made them untouchable, free to do as they pleased. With each generation, the daughters of Cain grew even more beautiful, but theirs was a beauty tinged with danger. Men would abandon wives and families simply to catch a glimpse of Naamah walking through the market. Her sisters were no less bewitching. They wore gowns of rare fabric, their hair braided with gold that shimmered like fire. They moved like living art, but beneath their glamour lay the same ancient curse. Trade routes brought great wealth to Enoch, but they also brought foreign customs, alien beliefs, and strange gods. Merchants spoke of distant lands where rituals were performed that would have horrified Adam and Eve. The descendants of Cain didn't recoil from these tales. They listened with curiosity, and then with admiration. Instead of rejecting those practices, they blended them into their own traditions. Children who once learned to tend sheep or cultivate crops were now trained to steal, deceive, and fight. Girls who might have become nurturing mothers learned instead to wield beauty like a weapon, to seduce, to manipulate, to conquer without lifting a sword. And slowly, the bonds that once held families and society together began to unravel. The elders of the city no longer met to seek wisdom or pursue justice. They gathered instead to divide the spoils of raids on weaker settlements. Their discussions focused not on peace, but on conquest. They plotted attacks against the peaceful descendants of Seth, driven by envy of their quiet joy. The divine gift of creativity, once meant to elevate humanity, was being twisted into tools of cruelty and destruction. Marriage, once sacred, became nothing more than a political transaction. Men took multiple wives not out of love, but to flaunt their power and status. Women were traded like livestock, bartered, ignored, silenced. The holy covenant between husband and wife, meant to reflect the deep love between God and his people, was now distorted beyond recognition. Even the children were no longer shielded from the spreading darkness. Parents who should have nurtured and protected them instead exposed them to corruption. Young ones learned to deceive before they could speak clearly. They were taught that taking by force was better than earning by toil. Technology, once a promise to ease human suffering, was refocused toward domination. Bronze weapons became deadlier with every generation. Music, once a bridge to the divine, now stirred violent passions. Songs no longer lifted hearts. They pulled them downward into shadow. The cities, once built as sanctuaries, had become prisons of moral collapse. Even nature seemed to revolt. Crops failed unpredictably. Animals grew fearful around human settlements. Storms became more violent, as if the sky itself was enraged. But the descendants of Cain saw these omens not as warnings, but as obstacles to be conquered. They saw adversity not as a divine message, but as something to overcome through strength. The corruption spread like venom through water. What had once been isolated moments of depravity became everyday behavior. What had been whispered scandals became sources of open pride. The line between good and evil blurred until few could tell the difference. The old ones remembered gentler times, but their voices were drowned out by a younger generation that embraced the darkness with zeal. The wisdom of age was dismissed as cowardice. The innocence of youth was crushed before it could take root. And in this twisted world, forces beyond human comprehension began to take interest. The world was being prepared for a deeper corruption, one that would make all that had come before seem like a prelude. The descendants of Cain, consumed by pride and rebellion, were about to learn that some boundaries, once crossed, can never be mended. The Nephilim, giants of the earth. The children born from the forbidden unions between the Watchers and the daughters of men were unlike anything creation had ever seen. They grew at a terrifying pace. Their bones elongated, their bodies hardened, until they loomed over ordinary people like towers over grass. By the time they reached maturity, even the smallest among them stood twice the height of a grown man. These were the Nephilim, the fallen ones. Their very existence defied the natural order. Their mothers often died during childbirth, unable to endure the burden of birthing such colossal beings. Those who survived were never the same, aged and broken, their bodies marked forever by what they had carried. The Nephilim possessed a strength that went beyond belief. They could lift boulders that would require 24 men to move. Their hands could splinter bone like it was dry wood. Their footsteps shook the ground. Their voices boomed like thunder, traveling miles through the air. But it wasn't just their physical might that made them dangerous. From their angelic fathers, they inherited knowledge not meant for mortals. They understood the secrets of the skies and the patterns of the earth. They could foresee storms, locate hidden metals deep in the ground, and craft weapons that never dulled, never broke. This made them invaluable to human rulers and utterly deadly. They rose to become the champions of kings, the generals of armies, and the designers of cities that defied imagination. Under their guidance, construction flourished and wars were won with precision. But everywhere they walked, they left behind an invisible stain. They were not content to serve. Their angelic blood fed their pride. Even more than Cain's descendants, they believed themselves superior. They demanded worship. They styled themselves as gods, requiring offerings, obedience, and reverence. Their appetites were as monstrous as their stature. They consumed massive amounts of food, stripping entire regions bare. And when that wasn't enough, their desires turned darker. Some developed a hunger for human flesh. They became the monsters of myth, the horrors that would haunt mankind's memory long after their fall. Wherever they went, war followed. Their presence upset the fragile balance among human communities. Kings who had Nephilim on their side grew arrogant and aggressive. Those without such allies lived in constant dread. The world was splitting into two halves, those who served the giants and those who hid from them. The Nephilim bred among themselves, forming new bloodlines. Each generation grew more distant from humanity, more alien, more hostile. They built cities with towering gates and halls wide enough for their enormous frames. Ordinary humans could barely pass through them. Their influence on human civilization was lasting. They accelerated warfare, engineering, and craftsmanship. But they also taught darker things. They showed humans how to craft powerful weapons, and how to wield them not for protection, but for domination. Their greatest crime, however, was spiritual. They presented themselves as gods, stealing worship that belonged to the Creator alone. Their existence was a living reminder that the veil between heaven and earth had been torn. Some giants were crueler than others, but none were truly good. Even those who showed occasional kindness did so with condescension, like a man might offer scraps to a pet. They could not see humans as equals. Their very nature forbade humility. Other children were born as well, offspring of Watchers and human women that did not result in full giants. These hybrids were stronger and larger than average, but retained a human appearance. They became the heroes of ancient legend, mighty warriors, gifted builders, leaders of myth. Not immortal, but undeniably extraordinary. As the Nephilim multiplied, the world became increasingly hostile to normal human life. Conflicts between giants tore entire landscapes apart. Valleys were flattened, rivers changed course, mountains were scarred by their battles. The earth groaned beneath the weight of their presence. The harmony that once existed between humanity and the natural world was shattered. What had begun as a garden of peace was becoming a battlefield, a place where the strong preyed upon the weak with no thought of justice or mercy. Enoch the righteous, a contrast emerges. While shadows thickened around Cain's descendants, a single flame still flickered in a different branch of the family tree. In the seventh generation from Adam, through the line of Seth, a child was born, one who would walk more closely with God than any man since Eden. His name was Enoch, and his life would become a shining beacon amid a world darkened by rebellion. While the descendants of Cain pursued glory for themselves, Enoch yearned for something far deeper, an intimacy with his Creator that had been lost since Eden. He grew up listening to stories passed down from Adam, of how God once walked with man in the cool of the day. Unlike those who built cities to defy heaven, Enoch longed for that communion to be restored. He spent countless hours in solitude, immersed in prayer and deep meditation. He was searching not for power or position, but to understand the very heart of God in a world growing steadily more corrupt. Then came his first vision. It arrived softly at first, like a whisper riding on the breeze. Then the presence grew stronger, until Enoch found himself standing within what seemed to be a celestial court. Angels moved with grace and intent, their faces radiant with holy light. At the center stood a throne of indescribable majesty, glowing with glory beyond language. Though the experience lasted mere moments in earthly time, it transformed Enoch's life forever. He saw that heaven was not silent, only sorrowful. That every act of rebellion on earth, the corruption of humanity, the fall of the Watchers, the violence of the Nephilim, was being observed with heartbreak from above. From that day forward, Enoch understood his calling. He began to speak, urging all who would listen to turn back. He preached not only judgment, but hope, declaring that God had not abandoned his creation, and that repentance was still possible. His message was simple, yet it carried divine authority. It was not too late to return from the edge of destruction. Among the line of Seth, his words met with mixed responses. Some were stirred deeply, gathering their families once more to seek God's face and walk in righteousness. Others dismissed him as fanatical, believing that God would surely overlook their minor compromises. But the harshest reception came from the descendants of Cain. When Enoch walked their city streets and spoke in their crowded plazas, he was met with scorn and open hostility. The Nephilim especially despised him. They saw his message as a threat to their self-proclaimed divinity. There were times when he barely escaped their violence, but none of it could turn him aside. The deeper his communion with God became, the more he saw. Visions came often, some in dreams, others in waking trances. He was shown the vast sweep of human history, from Eden to the end of days. He saw the flood before it came. He saw the wicked perish and a remnant preserved. He saw a path forward, redemption, not just ruin. These visions weren't given for comfort. They were given to be shared. So Enoch began to write. He became the first to record prophecy in written form. He named the Watchers, detailed their rebellion, and exposed their secret teachings. He warned of the coming judgment upon them, and upon those who followed in their steps. Word of Enoch's prophecies spread. Even among Cain's people, some were troubled. A few came quietly to him, asking how they might escape the wrath to come. His answer never changed. True repentance required more than sorrow. It meant a complete departure from the corrupt ways of the world. The Watchers took notice. Through human agents, they sent Enoch lavish offers: wealth, honor, power, if only he would be silent. When that failed, they resorted to threats. But Enoch walked under divine protection. No harm could touch him. As he aged, something miraculous began to happen. While other men stooped and faltered with years, Enoch seemed to grow more radiant. His eyes held light. His presence brought calm. Children were drawn to him, feeling peace just by standing near. His wife and children shared in his blessings. His son, Methuselah, inherited his wisdom, and carried his message into the next generation. Their household became a refuge in the midst of madness. But it wasn't his visions that made Enoch truly extraordinary. It was his walk, his daily communion with the living God. Over time, the divide between earth and heaven seemed to thin around him. Angels came and went from his dwelling. They remained invisible to hardened hearts, but not to those whose spirits were open. Enoch's life stood in sharp contrast to the prideful boasts of the Nephilim. They claimed divinity through power. He revealed it through humility. They used supernatural gifts to dominate. He used his to heal, to restore. In one lineage, pride begot rebellion. Rebellion birthed corruption, and corruption led to ruin. But in the other, humility led to obedience. Obedience brought blessing, and blessing became transformation. The choice before humanity was growing clearer by the day, but time was running short. The visions intensified, prophecies of doom. As the world plunged deeper into chaos, Enoch's visions grew more urgent, more vivid. In both dreams and open trances, he saw what was coming. Divine justice was no longer a distant rumor. It was at the door. The time for quiet pleading had passed. Standing before crowds both righteous and rebellious, Enoch's voice rang like thunder, sharp and undeniable. He named the Watchers, described their rebellion in detail, told of the punishment that would soon fall. He spoke with precision that no one could ignore. Even the Watchers themselves, so long unchallenged, began to fear. They had believed themselves untouchable, beyond judgment, above consequence. But Enoch's words pierced their arrogance. He spoke of chains forged in heaven, of prison beneath the earth, of judgment that would last until the end of all things. To Azel, who had armed mankind with tools of war, Enoch declared, "You will be bound with iron and cast into darkness. The violence you unleashed will return to you. The blood you spilled cries out, and heaven has heard." To Shem-Hazah, who had led the descent and taken mortal wives, Enoch gave no mercy. "Your mighty sons will perish. You will witness their fall. For the corruption you began will be wiped from the earth. But you will remain, to face the weight of your decisions." Every watcher received their judgment by name, their crimes detailed, their punishment revealed. Fear spread through their ranks. Some tried to silence Enoch, but divine protection surrounded him like a wall. Yet his sharpest condemnations were saved for the Nephilim. These giants had used their lineage to demand worship, consume resources, and exalt themselves as gods. Enoch stood before them and thundered, "You giants of the earth, you believe your size makes you mighty. But before the eyes of God, you are already dead. Your flesh will rot. Your spirits will find no rest. You will wander the world as demons, seeking bodies to inhabit, but never finding peace. The judgment begins with you." The Nephilim erupted in fury at these words, but no rage could silence the prophet. Every attempt to harm Enoch failed. When they sent armies, the soldiers lost their way or were overtaken by an overwhelming fear and turned back. When they tried to tempt and corrupt his followers, their efforts fell flat, met only with steadfast resistance. Enoch walked beneath an unshakable shield of divine protection. Human kings who had aligned themselves with the Watchers and the Nephilim were not exempt from warning. These rulers, who had sold the souls of their people in exchange for unnatural power, learned that their reckoning was near. The influence they had clutched so tightly would be ripped away. They would face judgment, not only from heaven, but from the very humans they once ruled. "The crown upon your head is made of straw," Enoch told one proud monarch. "Your palace walls will not save you when the waters rise. Your giant allies will flee when their own end arrives. Turn now, while you still have breath, or fall alongside those you chose to serve." Some rulers were shaken by these words and made desperate attempts to change course. They drove the Watchers out of their courts, tried to reverse their sins, and begged for redemption. But for many, it was too late. They had walked too far into the abyss. Their hearts had hardened. Their consciences were cauterized. Their ability to repent had nearly withered away. Enoch's warnings were not only for the powerful. He spoke also to the common people, many of whom had followed evil not out of malice but ignorance or weakness. To them, he offered both a warning and a lifeline. There was still time to turn back, but that time was short. "The rain is already gathering in the clouds," he cried to the crowds. The windows of heaven are preparing to open. Build an ark of righteousness for your household. Gather the clean and sacred things of life. Abandon the corrupt. The flood will not come only to destroy. It will come to cleanse and begin again. His visions did not stop at the flood. They stretched forward through time, revealing God's full redemptive plan. Enoch spoke of an age when the earth would be restored, when the righteous would inherit what had been lost, and when peace and justice would take their rightful place. But before that future could arrive, the earth would first need to be washed clean. Seth's descendants received these prophecies with both hope and sorrow. They welcomed the promise of justice, but many knew they would lose loved ones among Cain's line. Friends, family. Enoch's words forced hard decisions, divisions of loyalty, of love, of lineage. As the visions grew sharper, Enoch began to see specifics. He saw Noah receiving his divine instructions. He saw animals gathering under divine direction. He saw the final moments of grace before the deluge would fall. This clarity made his mission even more urgent. The Watchers made one last attempt to rewrite their fate. Through intermediaries, they begged Enoch to plead their case before God. They promised to change, to make amends. But Enoch's response was unwavering. The time for repentance is gone, for you. For the angelic, your judgment is already sealed. The fall of the Watchers. Divine retribution. Heaven's patience had expired. What had begun as a quiet rebellion among a few angels had now grown into a cosmic rupture, a threat to the very structure and purpose of creation. God's intervention would now be swift, final, and absolute. The judgment began with a sound unlike any ever heard, not a noise for ears, but a vibration felt in the marrow of every soul. In that instant, the Watchers across the earth lost their access to power. Their celestial connection was severed, cut like a thread. Michael, the archangel, was the first to descend. He appeared before Shemhaza, leader of the rebellion. Shemhaza sat in his opulent hall, surrounded by human servants and his hybrid offspring. Then the air thickened with divine weight. The walls dissolved into nothing, and before him stood the warrior of heaven, sword drawn, eyes blazing with eternal fury. "Your time is finished," declared Michael. His voice shook the bones of the earth. "By your own will, you have forfeited your place among heaven's sons. You are to be bound until the day of final judgment." Shemhaza tried to resist. He summoned every dark force he had mastered. But his power was gone, emptied like a cup turned over. The spiritual chains wrapped around him, invisible to mortals, but inescapable in their binding force. Elsewhere, the same judgment fell upon the rest. Each of the 200 Watchers was confronted by divine agents. Azel, the war teacher, discovered that no tactic could protect him. No blade could deflect heaven's justice. Penemu, the one who had taught mankind the secrets of writing, found that no word he knew could save him. The very language he had corrupted now failed him. The human women who had been wed to the Watchers watched in horror as their celestial husbands were seized. Some wept. Others felt something unexpected, relief. The dark presence that had cloaked their lives lifted. A fog of seduction and oppression dissolved in the light of divine order. The Nephilim, though not immediately destroyed, were marked. The divine power that had enhanced their greatness was withdrawn. They still loomed tall, but their edge had dulled. Their minds, once sharp and strategic, became confused and sluggish. Most critically, they were left alone. Their fathers, once unstoppable protectors, were now captives. The giants were left to face their fate without help. Many of the Watchers were cast into a realm known as Dudiel, a barren, stony wilderness locked in eternal shadow. There, they were bound in chains that burned yet did not consume. They were surrounded by silence and torment, fully conscious of what they had lost, and utterly powerless to undo it. Others were imprisoned beneath mountains or buried in vast caverns. The weight of the earth itself became part of their chains, and their knowledge, once a source of pride, became a torment. They saw clearly what they had done. They understood the depth of their failure, but they could no longer act. For the worst among them, a crueler fate was reserved. They were confined in a place where they could see the world they had corrupted, watch it crumble, yet touch none of it. They watched as their human disciples struggled, as their monstrous children faced revolt, as their grand ambitions disintegrated into dust. Raphael was sent to deal with Azel. The archangel found him surrounded by the weapons he had once forged for war. But now, those instruments offered no defense. Azel was consumed in darkness and cast into the pit, the desert where sharp stones tore at his spirit but could not grant him the release of true death. Uriel appeared before the Watchers who had unveiled the hidden wisdom of heaven. He stripped them of the sacred knowledge they had abused, casting them into realms of confusion and spiritual darkness. Gabriel confronted those who had twisted human sexuality and corrupted the sanctity of marriage. He bound them where their temptations could no longer reach, silencing their seduction. Meanwhile, the human allies of the Watchers found themselves suddenly alone and forsaken. Kings who had once leaned on supernatural guidance now faced their enemies with only human insight. Warriors who had once been strengthened by angelic force discovered they were merely flesh and bone. Priests who had served in tainted temples found their rituals hollow, the gods they once called upon now deaf and gone. Some among these men, who had been deeply entwined with celestial powers, lost their minds from the spiritual vacuum. They wandered their cities like orphaned children, crying out for masters who would never return. Others collapsed beneath the weight of guilt as the fog of unnatural influence lifted from their minds. But the most profound consequence was what befell the children of these forbidden unions. The Nephilim, along with their descendants, had always sensed they were set apart, strange and powerful. But now they began to realize they were also condemned. Without their Father's divine protection, they stood exposed, vulnerable to both earthly retribution and heaven's wrath. The binding of the Watchers marked the unraveling of the civilization they had helped shape. What once seemed indestructible began to crumble like sand under the tide. The supernatural gifts that had made Cain's cities flourish vanished, leaving only arrogance and violence behind. Heaven's message rang clear. The world would not be allowed to spiral unchecked. God's mercy had been stretched to its furthest extent. Judgment was on its way, and it would be total. Noah's time. The days of growing wickedness. The world into which Noah was born had become a stranger to the paradise his ancestors once knew. Wickedness had spread like a contagion, infiltrating every facet of life. What were once isolated acts of sin had metastasized into a culture of depravity. The Watchers' imprisonment had not purified mankind. Instead, it had removed the leash. The Nephilim, desperate to cling to their power, turned to even more savage means. Their infighting devastated the earth. Cities, painstakingly built over generations, were obliterated in mere days by the warring giants. Human populations trembled beneath their tyranny. Those who served the Nephilim lived like slaves, forced to feed and supply their masters' endless appetites. Those who resisted were hunted without mercy. Neutral ground vanished. Crime was no longer hidden, it was normalized. Murder became a tool for negotiation. Theft was a talent, not a transgression. Marriage vows were exchanged and broken in the same breath. Children were treated as property, abandoned, traded, or sold without remorse. The ties that had once held society together disintegrated. And in the midst of this decay, Noah's family stood apart, like a flickering flame in a collapsing tower. His grandfather Enoch had been taken by God, spared the sight of humanity's final descent. But his teachings lived on. They passed through Methuselah to Lamech, and from Lamech to Noah, with desperate urgency. Noah's father, Lamech, not to be confused with the violent descendant of Cain, was a man of conscience and longing. When Noah was born, Lamech spoke a prophecy. This one will bring us comfort from the curse upon the ground. He had no idea just how prophetic those words would prove to be. Growing up in a world that celebrated corruption, Noah learned quickly to place his trust not in men, but in the God of his fathers. He watched how swiftly humanity descended into violence without divine restraint. He saw the cruelty of the Nephilim, their contempt for life, their disregard for holiness. And still, he held to his faith. Noah's righteousness was not passive or silent. Like Enoch before him, he became a preacher of truth. He called the people to repentance, boldly, persistently, knowing full well the danger. But the people's hearts had grown even harder than in Enoch's day. Where Enoch found listeners, Noah found mostly scorn. The tools of Cainite brilliance were now used for destruction. Metallurgy birthed weapons of mass death. Engineering designed engines of siege, not shelter. Music no longer uplifted souls, It synchronized armies into machines of conquest. Even nature seemed to revolt against mankind. Earthquakes shook previously stable lands. Storms arrived with fury and without warning. The harmony between creation and its steward had been violently torn apart. The Nephilim, sensing their fall, grew frantic. Some bred obsessively, seeking to preserve their lineage. Others turned to dark rituals, desperate to contact their bound fathers or summon new powers. A few attempted to scale heaven itself, constructing towers to claw their way back into divine realms. Human society splintered into endless warring tribes. Great cities, once beacons of knowledge and craftsmanship, became fortified war camps. Trade collapsed. Travel became suicide. Knowledge was hidden, hoarded, weaponized. Women and children bore the heaviest burdens. They became trophies of violence instead of partners in peace. Families disintegrated in the chaos. Many children never knew what it meant to feel safe. They were born into war and raised by fear. Yet, through this horror, some flickers of light endured. Scattered families, small communities, still clung to God's ways. They met in secrecy. They shared their faith in hushed tones. They encouraged one another in hidden places, believing deliverance might still come. Noah became their shepherd, their voice, their last anchor in a world drowning in sin. And in his household, they found refuge. The corruption of the world deepened, yet Noah's household remained a sanctuary of faith. His wife, a woman of unwavering belief, shared his devotion to righteousness. Their 3 sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth were brought up in the knowledge of the true God, despite the wickedness that saturated the world around them. Their home stood as a living testament that holiness was still possible, even in the midst of overwhelming depravity. As the years slipped by, God's patience with humanity began to fray. The violence that now plagued the earth made the darkest days of Cain's descendants seem tame by comparison. Everywhere, the earth was soaked in corruption. Every living creature had deviated from its intended path. The time for mercy was nearly spent. Judgment was drawing near. Noah continued to preach, but his message began to shift. Where once he pleaded for repentance, now he warned of coming destruction. He spoke boldly of a flood that would cleanse the earth, a judgment that would fall upon every wicked soul. Most laughed at him, dismissing his message as the delusion of a madman. Yet a few began to listen, not because they were convinced, but because the signs were becoming impossible to ignore. Animals began gathering in odd formations, moving with eerie purpose as if responding to an unseen command. The weather turned chaotic, seasons bleeding into each other in unnatural ways. Even the stars seemed different, constellations shifting subtly, as though the heavens themselves were bracing for something momentous. In the thickening darkness, Noah heard the voice of God. It came to him with the same clarity once reserved for Adam and Eden. The message was brief but world-shaking. Build an ark. The end of all flesh is before me. I will destroy the earth with a flood. The last days, Noah builds the ark. The morning that God spoke these words dawned like any other, bloody and broken. The sounds of war drifted faintly through the valley where Noah's family lived. Smoke from burning cities blackened the horizon. But in this quiet hollow, something extraordinary had begun. Noah heard God's voice as though it spoke beside him, though no one else was near. The instructions were precise: build an ark of gopher wood, coat it with pitch inside and out, make it 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits tall. 3 decks, rooms throughout, a window for light. To any bystander, the command would have seemed utterly absurd. There were no oceans nearby. The scale of the structure was unprecedented. Gathering the materials would take years. Yet Noah did not question. He had walked with God long enough to trust without needing to understand. His family reacted in their own ways. His wife, steadfast and loyal, accepted the message without hesitation. If Noah said God had spoken, then she believed it absolutely. She immediately began preparing their household to support such a monumental task. Shem, the eldest, recognized the spiritual gravity of the command and threw himself into the work with reverence. Ham found excitement in the logistics and measurements, fascinated by the challenge. Japheth, ever adventurous, was eager to begin the physical labor. Word of Noah's strange project spread rapidly. A boat the size of a fortress, being built in the middle of dry land, hundreds of feet long, seemed too ridiculous to be taken seriously. People mocked openly. Children would dare each other to run past the construction site shouting insults at the mad prophet. But beneath the ridicule was a flicker of fear. Noah's reputation as a man of God was well known, even among his detractors. And if this ark was real, could his prophecies be true too? The work began slowly, with the gathering of wood. Noah and his sons journeyed long distances to find gopher trees strong enough to endure the storm ahead. Each tree was chosen with care. The process was deliberate, every plank cut and shaped with precision. Local craftsmen were hired for specialty work. Some joined for wages, others stayed out of curiosity. Many were struck by the quality of the construction. Every join was flawless, every surface smooth. Whatever this ark was for, it was being built to a standard far beyond ordinary craftsmanship. The pitch was another challenge. It had to be heated, spread evenly across every surface, inside and out. The fumes were suffocating, the work dangerous. Burns were common, but they pressed on, knowing that their survival depended on a perfect seal. Months turned to years. The ark began to tower over the valley, visible from miles away. Travelers would detour just to see it, some to mock, some to marvel, all to whisper. Inside, the construction was just as impressive. Rooms were arranged with meticulous forethought. Storage spaces for food and water, pens for animals, quarters for Noah's family. Every detail served a purpose. The layout was too refined to have come from human imagination alone. It bore the touch of divine intelligence. As completion neared, opposition intensified. Some of the Nephilim began to suspect the ark posed a threat. They couldn't articulate why, but they sent warriors to intimidate Noah into stopping. None succeeded. A divine shield protected the site, unseen but impenetrable. Religious leaders launched a different campaign. They accused Noah of blasphemy. They claimed God would never destroy what he had created. They staged public protests and prayer gatherings, painting Noah as a dangerous deceiver. Their influence swayed many. The pressure on Noah's family mounted. Yet even in the noise of opposition, a few hearts stirred. Quietly, some approached Noah asking how they might escape what was coming. His answer never changed: repent completely. Turn away from the corrupt world. Put your faith in God's mercy. Some did, but most found the price too steep. In the final year, the urgency grew. God gave Noah more detailed instructions: how to gather the animals, how to prepare the food, how to store supplies. The questions were endless. How does one collect every species on Earth? How does one keep them alive, fed, and peaceful? How do you stop them from devouring one another? Yet in every detail, God's provision met the task. The magnitude of what was unfolding became impossible to ignore. Animals, strange and familiar alike, began to arrive from all directions, drawn by a force they could not name, compelled by instincts deeper than their understanding. Creatures that should have feared one another now walked side by side, predator and prey moving together in unnatural peace. Lions trotted calmly beside lambs, wolves padded silently next to goats, serpents coiled through the grass alongside doves perched on branches, all hostility suspended under divine influence. The natural order itself seemed paused, held in quiet reverence as the earth braced for the storm to come. Noah and his family worked around the clock, scrambling to make space for these unexpected visitors. Food had to be gathered in staggering quantities: grains, grasses, fruits, meat, for a journey of uncertain length. Water was collected and stored in vats, jars, and barrels, enough to sustain not only 8 humans, but thousands of animals with unique and demanding needs. Every room in the ark, every compartment, every shelf and storage bay was packed with purposeful precision. The task was enormous, but they completed it with tireless devotion, driven by a sense of urgency that no one else seemed to feel as clearly. The people from surrounding towns and cities looked on in silence, their mockery choked back by what they were witnessing. The laughter that had once accompanied Noah's construction project gave way to confusion, then nervous glances, and finally hushed alarm. Divine intervention was no longer a myth or a theory. It stood before them in the open, walking on 4 legs and 2 wings. Still, denial clung to them like mist. They muttered that this strange parade of animals was some natural phenomenon, a passing anomaly, and surely nothing that would bring ruin. The idea that they themselves might be part of a doomed generation was too heavy to carry. In those final days before the flood, Noah made one last desperate plea. He went door to door, field to field, standing in the thresholds of homes and the corners of marketplaces, begging men and women to consider the truth. He looked into the eyes of mothers holding infants, fathers watching the skies, children playing in dusty courtyards. The hour of mercy is nearly gone, he warned. But the door has not yet shut. There is still time. Come with us. Turn from this path. A few listened, earnestly, with tears and trembling. Some considered abandoning everything to follow the old prophet and his God. But the weight of tradition, of fear, of mockery from friends and neighbors proved stronger. To follow Noah would mean admitting that the world they had built was wrong. It would mean sacrificing comfort and control for faith. And that, for most, was too much. Then came the final week. The air itself changed. A stillness fell over the land, unnatural and unsettling. The endless wars between tribes ceased without explanation, as if even violence was holding its breath. The mighty Nephilim grew quiet, their boisterous voices replaced with watchful silence. All creation seemed to tremble, sensing what human pride refused to acknowledge. On the seventh day, Noah and his family stepped into the ark. The animals followed, row upon row, group after group, clean animals in sevens, unclean in pairs, just as God had commanded. The birds arrived in swirling flocks, settling into their roosts with uncanny order. The entire process unfolded with divine choreography that defied coincidence or chance. And then, when all had entered, Noah stood once more at the open door. His voice rang out across the valley, imploring any soul still wavering to step into salvation. Hundreds had gathered, curious or skeptical, or just wanting to witness the spectacle. But no one moved. And without a single human hand, the massive door of the ark creaked shut. The sound echoed like thunder across the hills, final and solemn. A shiver went through the crowd as they realized the opportunity to escape had passed. Whatever was coming, they would now meet it outside the safety of the ark. Inside, Noah's family stood in silence. Relief mingled with dread. They had obeyed every command, but now they were sealed in a wooden box with thousands of animals, trusting the unseen God who had led them this far to carry them through the storm. Their test of faith had only just begun. 7 days passed. Silence hung heavy across the land. The crowds around the ark dispersed, the drama seeming to have passed. People returned to their lives, some mocking more loudly, others quietly relieved. But for those attuned to spiritual things, the atmosphere pulsed with tension. Dogs howled at night without cause. Birds fell silent. Insects buzzed and swarmed with frantic energy, as though preparing for something unseen. Then, on the seventh day, the skies darkened with terrifying speed. Clouds surged from the horizon like walls of gray, climbing higher and higher, blotting out the sun in a matter of hours. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing down on the world like a weighted shroud. A low rumble echoed across the heavens, not like ordinary thunder, but a deeper groan, ancient, resonant, full of mourning. Inside the ark, Noah's family felt the first drops fall. They prayed in unison, hands clasped, hearts open, their voices rising in a chorus of gratitude and trembling awe. Outside, people noticed the change. At first, the rain was gentle, a passing drizzle. Children danced in puddles. Adults chuckled nervously, but the clouds did not break. Instead, the drizzle became a steady downpour. Then a deluge. Torrents of water fell like curtains of glass crashing from the sky. Roofs collapsed. Streets vanished beneath rushing streams. Rivers overflowed their banks with terrifying speed. And then, the earth itself began to give way. From deep within the ground, fountains burst forth, tearing through stone and soil like spears. Water erupted from dry places, spraying skyward with violent force. Cracks opened underfoot, flooding valleys and hills. These were not ordinary floods. These were the very foundations of the world unraveling. Exactly as Noah had foretold, the fountains of the deep had broken open, joining the torrents above to overwhelm all creation. The Nephilim, with their remaining insight, were among the first to understand. They gathered their armies and moved toward the mountains, urging their followers to higher ground. But no matter how high they climbed, the water followed. It surged up cliffs. It carved through hillsides. It was unstoppable. In the once great cities of Cain's descendants, fortresses of bronze and stone, panic erupted. People clawed at their walls, praying their strongholds would hold. But the flood did not knock. It simply rose, cold and unrelenting, swallowing the works of man in silence and ruin. And still, the rain kept falling, and the fountains kept roaring, and the ark, silent and sealed, began to rise. The floods surged through the streets like a living force, hunting every hollow, filling every crevice, consuming low places with deliberate precision. The technologies that humanity once celebrated, its crowning achievements in urban design offered no defense. Drainage systems that had handled storms for generations were choked in moments. Mighty buildings that had stood proudly through earthquakes and wars began to shudder and collapse, their foundations crumbling as the unrelenting waters scoured away everything beneath. The weapons that had once given men a sense of invincibility were now pathetic relics in the face of a judgment that could not be fought, bribed, or reasoned with. Those who had once laughed at Noah's sermons now trembled as they remembered his words with new and terrible clarity. The wild-eyed prophecies they had mocked as madness were unfolding in devastating detail. Some tried desperately to reach the ark, but it was too late. The water was already too high, and the divine barrier around the vessel made it unreachable. Entire families were torn apart by the chaos. Parents separated from children by violent currents, homes ripped from the earth, and people swept away with terrifying ease. All the fragile threads that once held their communities together unraveled as quickly as the walls around them fell. Survival became a solitary instinct. All loyalty vanished. The wealthy discovered that their treasures were not life rafts. Gold and silver, once worshipped, sank like stones in the deepening waters. Fine garments turned to traps, their heavy folds pulling their wearers down. The lavish palaces they had built to showcase their dominance over others were obliterated in seconds, erased as effortlessly as one might wipe dust from a table. Animals not chosen for the ark, wild and tame alike, fled in frenzied waves, their instincts overtaken by panic. Predators and prey ran side by side in hopeless escape, but there was nowhere to flee. The waters were coming from every direction, rising from beneath the earth and falling from the heavens with a rhythm that felt intentional, unrelenting, cosmic. Some communities, realizing the danger far too late, attempted to save themselves by building their own arks, crude imitations of Noah's vessel, hastily nailed together with desperation. But these boats, unblessed and hastily crafted, could not endure what was not of this world. Winds struck from all points of the compass. Towering waves, higher than anything the oceans had ever known, swallowed them whole. Their remnants scattered like splinters on a merciless tide. The daughters of Cain, whose allure had swayed kings and stirred angels to rebellion, stood helpless now. The beauty that had once bent men's wills meant nothing to the flood. Judgment fell evenly. It made no distinction between the radiant and the plain, the powerful and the forgotten. Within hours, land that had been dry since the beginning of time lay buried under depths that could drown a man standing tall. Within days, the tallest hills disappeared. The flood did not merely rise. It devoured. It consumed the earth with a hunger that seemed endless, insatiable. Every symbol of human pride was now drowning. Inside the ark, Noah's family sat in silence, listening to the symphony of destruction outside. Through the thick wooden walls came the wails of the perishing, the groaning of structures collapsing, the wild roar of waters claiming all that once stood firm. These were not only the sounds of death, but of judgment, of God keeping his word. The rain did not pause, not for an hour, not for a breath. The skies had opened, and all that had been held back since the dawn of time now poured without measure. The earth, long cursed, was being cleansed, its wounds flooded and reset. Within the ark, a remnant floated, chosen and preserved. The daughters lost. This was the extinction of a lineage. The waters first came gently, like heaven's tears, soft drops that kissed the ground rather than struck it. The daughters of Cain felt them and laughed. They had endured worse. They had seen droughts. They had weathered storms. This felt strange, yes, but harmless. At first, Naamah stood at her high window, watching the clouds thicken with a painter's patience. Her beauty, untouched by age, still radiated power. Her eyes, lit by the forbidden knowledge she had gathered over a lifetime, shimmered with secrets. She had instructed kings in the ways of the stars. She had guided artisans to craft metals that sang when shaped. She had danced with celestial beings who had defied heaven for her. Now, she watched water seep into the streets below. Elsewhere, the other daughters of Cain gathered in their great halls of stone and bronze. Ada's lineage played instruments that filled marble chambers with haunting tones. Zillah's sons hammered molten metal into weapons that gleamed with celestial fury. Granddaughters and great-granddaughters of Cain carried on as if nothing were changing. They created. They celebrated. They dismissed the warnings, gentle as the rain had once been. But outside, Noah's hammer struck rhythmically against the ark's hull. Each blow was not just labor. It was prophecy. It was a funeral bell for an age. He worked with calm determination while the daughters danced, oblivious. He sealed the ark with pitch while they sealed their fate with pride. The contrast was absolute. One man building towards salvation, while an entire civilization spiraled toward ruin. The rain intensified. Streets became rivers. Rivers became violent torrents that carved through cities like knives through flesh. The daughters watched as the cities of their ancestors collapsed, brick by brick, beam by beam. The bronze and iron their sons had mastered could not shield them. The music they had perfected was silenced by the voice of the flood. Naamah was one of the last to truly comprehend what was happening. She had lived so long, endured so much, that change seemed beneath her notice. The hidden arts she had practiced for centuries had given her glimpses of eternity. She had believed herself immune to divine wrath. When the water reached her ankles, she held fast to that illusion. When it touched her waist, something broke. Doubt entered like cold steel, quiet but final. The other daughters each met their end in their own way. Some fled to mountaintops and towers, seeking refuge in elevation. Others held their children close, whispering the old stories one final time. A few stood unyielding, cursing the God who had once marked their ancestor in a field. But the flood did not care. It did not yield. It rose with the patience of eternity and the resolve of heaven. The children of the Watchers, the Nephilim, once so mighty, discovered that their strength meant nothing now. They could shatter stone, but they could not escape the rising tide. They could demolish walls, but they could not forge wings. One by one, these beings who had once been mistaken for gods were swallowed by the waves. The last of Cain's daughters slipped beneath the water. With them vanished centuries of accumulated brilliance. Their songs were never sung again. Their crafts, perfected over generations, disappeared into the depths. The beauty that had once turned angels from heaven now fed the fish. The first branch of humanity, the earliest sprout from Adam's tree, was severed. And yet, even as they drowned, some say the daughters spoke. Naamah, they whisper, uttered a final prophecy about a bloodline that would remember. Ada sang a melody that would someday echo through future generations. Zillah's last breath carried a blessing meant for distant mothers and distant lands. Perhaps these stories are true. Perhaps they are only hopes given shape. But they reveal something deeper than any history book could preserve. The flood did not merely take lives. It took futures. It swept away paths that might have been. The daughters of Cain were humanity's first great leap into freedom from divine command. Freedom to choose their own way. They showed us the heights mortals can reach when they walk alone. And they showed us, with equal force, where such paths eventually end, when they turn their backs on wisdom. And as the last daughter sank beneath the rising water, the silence that followed spoke louder than thunder. As the waves rose higher and the waters claimed their final victims, something profound came to an end. Something that had begun at the very dawn of history. The line that perished was not merely Cain's family. It was the first human experiment in autonomy, the earliest attempt to forge identity apart from divine will. The flood did not just drown people, it submerged a dream, the ambition of pure human achievement without God. What would rise from those same waters would be transformed. Smaller, more cautious, perhaps wiser. Inside the ark, Noah and his family floated above the tomb of that old world. They carried within them not only the future of mankind, but a host of unanswerable questions. What might have happened if the daughters had chosen another path? What if Cain's curse had led to redemption instead of rebellion? What if their beauty, which once stirred the desires of angels, had been used to glorify the one who created it? These questions sank beneath the waves with the daughters, never to surface again. The post-flood world would be simpler, less grand, but maybe more humble. The age of ambition was over. The age of the daughters of Cain had ended. And yet, though the flood erased their names from the land, their echoes would linger quiet, elusive, waiting for rediscovery by generations yet to come, who would one day wonder what humanity had left behind in the depths. Did every last one of them perish? As the waters receded, they moved slowly, like memories slipping away from the mind of an aging man. When dry land emerged again, it seemed the world had been made new. The cities that Cain's children had built gone. The women who once ruled those cities vanished. The giants who had once walked among them, now silent. Or were they? Noah's family stepped onto solid ground carrying more than breath in their lungs. They brought with them stories, lineages, names, and within those names, perhaps the faintest echoes of all who had come before. A haunting question persisted. Had every trace of Cain's line truly been erased? Ancient whispers suggest otherwise. When the sons of Noah dispersed to repopulate the earth, they encountered strange phenomena, cities that seemed too familiar, customs that mirrored those from before the flood, faces in the crowd that bore unsettling resemblances to those long thought perished. These discoveries sowed seeds of doubt. Ham, Noah's youngest son, journeyed into distant lands that stirred memories of his father's stories. He came upon ruins, massive, strange ruins that should not have existed. Some claim he found more than just stones. Some believe he found survivors, not descendants of Noah, but of those who had been destined to die beneath the flood waters. Though unproven, such tales refuse to fade, because the possibility stirs something ancient in the soul. The daughters of Cain had been beautiful, cunning, and wise. Could they truly have all perished? Or had some used their forbidden knowledge, their deep understanding of the earth and skies, to find shelter when judgment came? Nama, whose name meant pleasant or beautiful, is central to this speculation. Some later traditions claim she was not only spared, but that she became Noah's wife. If true, the irony is too perfect to ignore, that one of Cain's own daughters helped carry humanity through the flood. True or not, the idea invites deeper questions about blood, legacy, and the persistence of the past. The lines blur further when we consider Noah's sons. Shem, Ham, and Japheth fathered peoples that, in time, displayed attributes eerily similar to the lost world. Ham's descendants in particular, those known as the Canaanites, exhibited uncanny parallels. They revived technologies, built cities of ambition, and pursued knowledge that mirrored the ancient ways. Could remnants of Cain's bloodline have survived through marriage, through forgotten unions, through the tangled web of human lineage? Even Scripture hints at this complexity. The Bible acknowledges that the lines of Seth and Cain were not strictly divided. Intermarriage before the flood may have woven threads that even the waters could not unravel. Ancient myths support the possibility. Greek titans, Mesopotamian Apkallu, beings of wisdom before a great flood. Their tales feel familiar, like reflections of the same primal story told in a different tongue. Archaeology lends its own whispers. Scattered across the globe are signs of civilizations that predate what post-flood humanity should have achieved, technologies that emerge fully formed, then vanish, without precedent. These anomalies suggest that something endured, something ancient, something once thought destroyed. Because the daughters of Cain were never just women. They were a mindset, a worldview, a way of living and creating and reaching that may have run too deep in the human soul to be washed away. Even in silence, even in myth, their spirit survived, hidden in ritual, buried in custom, woven into dreams. Some point to the Tower of Babel as proof. That doomed structure echoed their ambition to rise, to reach, to become as gods. The same defiant hunger that once danced in the eyes of Nama and Zillah now rose in stone and pride toward heaven. And so, the question of survival transcends history. It asks what kind of world we inherited. If the daughters of Cain truly left no trace, then the flood was a perfect reset. But if even one breath of their legacy endured, then the flood was merely a pause, and the story, with all its beauty and danger, continued. The flood did more than drown people. It buried evidence. It erased clarity. What remains is mystery. And in that mystery, the daughters of Cain achieved immortality, not in flesh, but in symbol. They became echoes within the human story, voices beneath the waves. Their dreams, their defiance, their beauty, their tragedy passed down not just in blood, but in longing, in questions, in songs. And so their legacy became humanity's inheritance, whether carried through genetics or memory. As the waters drained and the ark settled, a new world awaited. But even that clean-swept world would find itself haunted by stories that refused to die, by daughters who refused to be forgotten. Let me know when you're ready for the final portion, starting with Ashtaroth. The goddess worshipped by the Canaanites bore eerie resemblances to the daughters descended from the world's first murderer. Her beauty was said to defy all comparison. She was a deity of both sensual love and ruthless war, and she demanded offerings so horrific that they shocked even the children of Israel. In the prostitution that filled her temples, some discerned faint echoes of the unions between heavenly beings and mortal women. In the rituals dedicated to her, many caught glimpses of the same forbidden knowledge that once shimmered behind Nama's eyes. The ancient builders of Mesopotamia passed down similar tales. Babylon, the towering monument to human ambition, seemed to throb with the same pulse that had once flowed through Enoch, the first city built by Cain. The tower they dared to build rose upward with the same pride and defiance that had marked Cain's bloodline. Their scribes preserved knowledge that felt older than memory, older than the flood. Their magicians practiced arts that mirrored the crafts of daughters who had danced with fallen angels in ages past. Inanna, the Sumerian goddess of heaven and earth, bore another reflection of the lost daughters. She was radiant with wisdom that predated civilization itself. She descended into the underworld and returned bearing secrets that should have stayed buried. Her allure was the stuff of legend, and her dominion inspired awe. In her myth, many saw Nama's shadow along with the silhouettes of her sisters. The Egyptians passed down their own echoes of the vanished lineage. Isis, their great divine mother, wielded a magic that seemed to echo from before the beginning. She raised the dead, moved nature itself, and embodied the feminine essence lost in the floodwaters with Cain's daughters. Through devotion to her, that ancient essence seemed to rise once again. The Greeks inherited these same archetypes, reshaped through their own myths. The Titans, ancient beings who reigned before the Olympians, shared the same strength, pride, and fall as the Nephilim. Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods, was another mirror of the Watchers who delivered forbidden truths to Earth. And the Sirens, whose songs led sailors to their doom, echoed the deadly allure of daughters who once seduced angels. But these parallels were not confined to myth alone. They emerged in real practices and cultures. The Philistines, fierce enemies of Israel, worshipped gods like Dagon who bore traces of the old world's faith. Their warriors, like Goliath, were giants, descendants or echoes of the Nephilim that had once stalked the land. Their society prized the very things Cain's children had elevated: strength, craftsmanship, and proud independence. The Phoenicians, renowned as master seafarers, carried knowledge of oceans that seemed older than the flood itself. Their ships spread more than goods; they spread memory, fragments of Cain's urban legacy, scattered across the Mediterranean. Their cities rose like reflections of Enoch, the city that had started it all. Their goddess Astarte, too, seemed like a distant reincarnation of that same feminine divinity drowned beneath judgment's tide. Even among the Israelites, the very people chosen to remain separate, echoes of Cain's daughters reappeared. The Song of Songs celebrated a love so intense it recalled the forbidden passions of old. The wisdom books of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes struggled with questions that might have once stirred in the minds of Cainite philosophers. That old human hunger for knowledge, for meaning, for creation beyond bounds, continued to whisper through their pages. And the echoes weren't always found where one expected them. The builders of great stone circles and massive monuments seemed to possess engineering secrets that disappeared and reappeared like tides of memory. Metalworkers in distant lands rediscovered techniques uncannily similar to those pioneered by Tubal-Cain. Musicians, too, crafted instruments and melodies that, though they had never heard Jubal's name, still seemed to channel his spirit. These mysterious echoes force a deeper question. Did the flood truly erase Cain's influence? Or did it simply drive that influence underground, forcing it to resurface in fragments, in dreams, in art and ritual? Were these cultures reinventing greatness? Or were they remembering it? To answer that, we must understand what the daughters of Cain truly symbolized. They were more than just women. They embodied humanity's ancient tension with the divine. They stood between power and humility, between knowing and surrendering, between transcending limits and honoring them. That battle didn't drown. It endured. In the cultures that rose after the waters fell, the spirit of the daughters stirred again, not in blood, but in choice. Not in DNA, but in desire. Every generation that dared to reach beyond the given walked the same road as Nama. Every civilization that built towers and temples and song did so with the same longing that once moved the first daughters of the East. These were not mere genetic echoes. They were spiritual inheritances, possibilities that could never be fully buried. And they would never be truly silent. Let me know when you're ready for the next section. The price of knowledge was steep, and Nama paid it, even though she may never have truly asked for it. Islamic traditions layered her story with new dimensions. Some identified her with the enigmatic Queen of Sheba, the sovereign who dared to test the wisdom of Solomon. Others proposed she was the mother of the jinn, those mysterious spiritual beings that inhabit the space between angels and men. In these tales, Nama was neither wholly righteous nor entirely wicked. She existed in the in-between, a bridge straddling heaven and earth, belonging completely to neither. Perhaps the most astonishing version of her legend claimed Nama had survived the flood itself by becoming the wife of Noah. This account proposed that her unmatched beauty and piercing wisdom had captured the attention of the righteous man. That her knowledge, preserved from the fallen world, had been deemed valuable enough to bring into the new one. If such a claim were true, then Nama was not merely a witness to history, she was its mother. The matriarch of all who came after, her blood flowing silently through every living soul. This alternate tradition resolved several long-standing mysteries. It offered a plausible reason for the survival of certain knowledge and ancient skills despite the flood's devastation. It clarified how echoes of Cain's legacy still resonated through later civilizations. More importantly, it whispered of a God whose judgment was always accompanied by mercy, that even the most fallen could be redeemed if they bowed in repentance and humility. The idea of Nama as Noah's wife also cast a new light on curious silences in Scripture. While the Bible names the wives of Noah's sons, it never mentions Noah's own wife. Could that unnamed figure have been the most renowned woman of her generation? Could the matron of the renewed world have been the last daughter of the lost one? During the Renaissance, these questions captivated many scholars. They saw in Nama a complex symbol, a meeting point between the allure of knowledge and the peril of ambition, between destruction and salvation. To some artists, she was a tragic heroine, torn between destiny and desire. To others, she was a mystic queen, mistress of primal arts older than civilization itself. Still others painted her as a nurturing mother, the one who had helped carry humanity through its darkest hour. Each depiction revealed more about the era's understanding of womanhood, power, and redemption than about Nama herself. Modern academics have sifted through the myths in search of the historical woman beneath. Some argue that Nama was likely a composite, an amalgam of memories from multiple women in Cain's lineage, fused over time. Others see her as a living metaphor for the seismic shift from nomadic life to settled cities, a symbol of the evolving status and roles of women in early society. Feminist thinkers have reclaimed Nama in recent decades, viewing her not as a villain or victim, but as a rebel pioneer. In this lens, she was a woman who dared to reach for knowledge and wield power in a world that reserved both for men. Her downfall, then, was not divine punishment, but the backlash of a patriarchal system terrified by feminine strength. Religious communities continue to wrestle with her story. To some, Nama is a cautionary tale, a living parable about the dangers of ambition unmoored from obedience. To others, she's a beacon of hope, a reminder that divine mercy can reach even those most estranged from grace. Still others read her tale as an invitation to reflect on how beauty, wisdom, and power shape our relationships with the sacred and with each other. What is undeniable is this: Nama has transcended myth and memory. She has become a mirror, a reflection in which each generation sees its own struggle, with temptation, with truth, with redemption. Whether she was a demon matriarch or something far more nuanced, her name now stirs questions that cut to the core of human experience. In the centuries since her name was last spoken as a living person, Nama has endured. As a concept, as a caution, as a symbol of paths chosen and paths lost. She embodies humanity's eternal attraction to beauty, knowledge, and divinity, and the tangled consequences that arise when all three converge in one soul. The mark of Cain, a legacy reinterpreted. The mark that God placed upon Cain's brow was never intended as punishment. It was a protection, a divine warning that no one should take vengeance on the first man to commit murder. But time has a way of warping meanings, and humanity, driven by fear and prejudice, twisted that mark into something far darker. Once a sign of mercy, it became a symbol of separation, of stigma. The mark of Cain, once placed to halt violence, was reinterpreted across generations as a sign of cursed lineage. His daughters, his descendants, would have grown up beneath the weight of that knowledge. They were not just talented, not just breathtaking, they were marked. The children of the one who had slain his brother and walked the earth under divine protection and shame. Early interpreters often imagined the mark as literal. Some pictured a symbol etched onto Cain's skin, perhaps a letter or a rune. Others suggested it was a tremor in his hands, a sign of instability and guilt that would haunt him forever. Still others envisioned it as a pallor or a shadow in his appearance, something that visibly set him apart. Medieval scholars speculated further. They began to see the mark not as a physical blemish but as a spiritual brand. It represented the exile from grace, the distance between Cain and his maker. No human eye could perceive it, but spiritual beings could see it plainly. This theory explained how Cain could still build cities, bear children, and influence the world while remaining spiritually distinct. The most tragic corruption of this mark came much later. Some used it to justify racism and oppression. They claimed entire ethnic groups were descended from Cain, bearing his mark in their features or skin. This was a cruel distortion, both morally false and theologically bankrupt. It weaponized an ancient story to justify modern injustice, turning a symbol of mercy into a tool of hate. These interpretations miss the entire heart of the story. God's mark was an act of protection, not condemnation. It was given to stop violence, not sanction it. It proclaimed that even the worst sin did not place someone beyond the reach of divine grace. For the daughters of Cain, this legacy was complex. They inherited not guilt, but identity. They lived under the shadow of the mark, but also beyond it. Naamah's beauty, Ada's nurturing spirit, Zillah's fierce intelligence, these were not curses. They were not born of the mark. They were choices forged in the fires of their own lives. Some legends even said the daughters themselves bore marks, but these were not signs of shame. They were signs of power. They drew attention, not rejection. The forbidden knowledge they mastered, the divine unions they engaged in, the art they pioneered, all these, too, were expressions of a lineage both touched and set apart. And though the flood came to wash that legacy away, some legacies are carved too deep to drown. The mark was meant to be washed away with everything else that had belonged to Cain's line. But if the mark was truly about separation from God, then no flood, no matter how vast, could erase it with water alone. Something deeper was required: repentance, reconciliation, and a complete return to grace. That lingering question would haunt generations that followed. Had the mark truly been cleansed, or had it somehow endured, passed on through hidden lines and unspoken memories? In the aftermath of the flood, the peoples that emerged seemed to carry faint echoes of the mark, as if its spiritual weight had not been buried beneath the waves. The descendants of Ham, the Canaanites, became marked in a different way, targeted for conquest, viewed with suspicion, and seen as bearing some unspoken legacy of divine disapproval. The mark of Cain resurfaced in these narratives, no longer literal, but symbolic, reappearing in the tensions, judgments, and moral divides of post-flood history. Yet the mark showed itself even in places no one expected. Within Israel's own lineage, King David bore a mark, not on his skin, but upon his soul, etched by the weight of his sin with Bathsheba. The Israelites wandering in the desert were marked by rebellion. The prophets were marked too, set apart not by sin, but by divine calling. Sometimes the mark meant guilt. Sometimes it meant purpose. As Christian traditions unfolded over time, interpretations of the mark multiplied. Some saw it as a foreshadowing of the cross, a burden taken up by Christ, not for his own guilt but for humanity's. Others viewed it as a symbol of original sin, the inherited estrangement from God that every human bears. And yet others found in the mark something entirely different, a sign not of damnation, but of unrelenting mercy. A divine reminder that even the greatest of sinners was not beyond the reach of grace. The mark raised questions that pierced to the heart of human identity. Were the sins of ancestors truly passed down to their children? Did the daughters of Cain carry guilt they had not earned? Could a divine mark be inherited, or was each soul judged by its own path? There were no easy answers, but the questions themselves shaped theology, myth, and the moral struggles of every generation. Scholars of modern times have tried to pierce the ancient veil, offering new hypotheses. Some believe the mark was physical, a scar, a brand, a form of ancient tattoo, common in cultures where identity and status were inscribed into the skin. Others argue the mark was metaphorical from the beginning, a poetic description of Cain's spiritual rupture, his alienation not just from God, but from the human family. Perhaps the true nature of the mark matters less than the meaning we give it. The mark of Cain endures in the imagination because it speaks to universal truths. It is the mark of guilt and hope, of separation and restoration, of punishment mingled with protection. It forces us to ask whether grace can reach the darkest corners, whether history binds us, or whether we are free to forge new paths. The daughters of Cain were born under that mark, but they were not defined by it. Naamah's seductive beauty, Ada's maternal wisdom, Zillah's fierce intelligence, these were their own offerings to the world, not shadows cast by their ancestors' crime. Some traditions even suggested the daughters bore visible signs of their lineage, not as deformities, but as markings of captivating power, drawn not to repel, but to dazzle. Their knowledge, their arts, their unions with celestial beings, all of it seemed inseparable from the mark, and yet wholly their own. The flood, in theory, was to erase it all, to cleanse the earth of everything Cain's lineage had left behind. But if the mark had less to do with the body and more to do with the soul, then it could not be drowned. And so it lived on in stories, in fears, in the ache for grace, in the desire to be seen and still be spared. The Watchers and the daughters of Cain together, their story seeded the mythic foundations of the ancient world. Their tale, of divine beings descending to earth, falling in love with mortals, and producing hybrid offspring, echoed through time, culture to culture, reshaped but never forgotten. The theme was always the same: the forbidden collision between heaven and earth. The Watchers were not passive observers, they were divine sentinels, tasked to behold but never to intervene. They were boundaries in flesh, a line drawn between the sacred and the profane. But when they beheld the daughters of Cain, so luminous, so learned, so dangerously alluring, they chose desire over duty. They gave in. Their fall was not an accident. It was a decision that shook both realms. In their passion, the Watchers brought knowledge meant only for heaven. They taught cosmetics and adornment, granting women the tools to enhance what was already stunning. They showed men the secrets of metal and fire, transforming peace into war, making weapons where once there had been tools. They revealed celestial paths and the secrets of stars, turning what was sacred into strategy. The veil between divine and mortal tore. The world would never be the same. From their unions came the Nephilim, giants in flesh and ambition. Beings that neither heaven nor earth could claim. Too divine to be human, too human to be divine. They ruled with power, ruled with fear. Their voices could shake the sky. Their steps fractured the ground. They were glory twisted into violence. Their presence unbalanced the world. And their story, too, lived on. In Greece, they were the Titans, mighty predecessors to the gods, cast down after their arrogance. Prometheus echoed the Watchers, defiant, compassionate, punished. In Mesopotamia, the Apkallu, the fish-cloaked sages, emerged from the sea to teach humanity. Their gifts built civilizations. Their wisdom bore a curse. Knowledge came at a price. In India, the Gandharvs, celestial musicians, took mortal wives, producing radiant children born of both longing and fate. These offspring, caught between realms, rose as heroes or fell as monsters. In Ireland, the Tuatha Dé Danann faded into mist, but not before leaving behind bloodlines tinged with the divine. Their children were marked by power, by tragedy, by the tension between worlds. The Norse remembered Odin's tryst with mortal women, producing kings who ruled with the insight of gods and the burdens of men. Across continents, across centuries, the pattern repeated. Divine beings, mortal lovers, extraordinary children. Gifts, curses. Myths born not from fantasy, but from one ancient truth: the Watchers and the Daughters had opened a door that could never be closed. Their story was the first myth, the seed of all later legends. It is a story not just of love and rebellion, but of knowledge gained too soon and power held without wisdom. And it endures because it is ours. Because we, too, walk that same path, reaching, always reaching, toward what lies just beyond the veil. The mortal women paid a heavy price for their beauty and allure. Their desirability drew divine beings across forbidden thresholds, and the children born from these unions became legends, some as heroes, others as monsters, and some as both. Their extraordinary nature made them both saviors and destroyers, able to shape the world they walked in profound, unpredictable ways. These myths served more than just entertainment. They offered frameworks for understanding the mysteries of civilization itself. They explained how humanity had come to possess knowledge and technology that seemed beyond natural progression, suggesting that these gifts had originated with divine visitors. They accounted for the rise of individuals whose abilities exceeded human limits, kings who ruled with otherworldly wisdom, prophets who spoke with heaven's authority, and warriors who could not be defeated. They bridged the gap between gods and mortals, showing both the possibilities and the cost of crossing that line. These stories also revealed deep cultural anxieties about ambition, about the price of wisdom, and the consequences of reaching too far. The forbidden arts were not simply danger, they were temptation wrapped in brilliance. Every new discovery, every leap in human advancement, offered both blessing and peril. The daughters of Cain fit seamlessly into this ancient narrative pattern. They were the beautiful mortals whose presence shattered the restraint of heavenly beings. They received forbidden truths, became mothers to exceptional offspring, and triggered events that would ripple through time. Their story became the model for 1,000 variations of divine mortal romance, a pattern etched across world mythologies. The flood that ended their lineage also marked the end of an era, the age when heaven walked openly among men. After the deluge, the divide between mortal and divine widened. The gods, or their angelic counterparts, retreated to higher realms. Humanity was left to chart its future with only the memory of what had once been possible. Still, the stories lingered. They preserved both the dream and the danger of transcending human limits through divine contact. They whispered that knowledge gained too soon, or love forged across forbidden lines, could bring not salvation, but ruin. The tale of the Watchers and the daughters of Cain became more than legend. It became a mirror for humanity, a lens through which to examine its own hunger for knowledge, its desire for transcendence, and its struggle with restraint. The myth suggested that mortals were not beasts, but neither were they gods. They were something in between, powerful yet fragile, exalted yet limited, carrying both potential and peril within their souls. Even now, these myths echo because the questions they ask have never left us. Where are the limits of what we should know? What price are we willing to pay for progress? Can we reach for greatness without losing ourselves in the process? The Watchers and the Daughters asked those questions first. Their story seeded the foundation for every tale that would follow. While the daughters of Cain danced with angels and built shining cities that scraped the sky, another line was quietly growing in the shadows of their legacy. The sons of Seth walked a different road. Their path was not carved in ambition or adorned with jewels, but marked by worship and quiet obedience. They chose reverence over rebellion, humility over hubris. Their story, though less dramatic, bore the seeds of hope in a world drowning in corruption. Seth himself had been born into sorrow. Adam and Eve, broken by the murder of Abel and the exile of Cain, received Seth as a divine appointment, a second chance after unbearable loss. His name meant appointed, a sign from the beginning that he was chosen to carry forward what Abel had represented. The sons of Seth saw the divine differently than their cousins in Cain's line. Where Cain's descendants sought mastery over creation through invention and dominion, Seth's children sought intimacy with their Creator through surrender and devotion. They raised no walls of stone. Instead, they built altars. They left no bronze cities behind. Instead, they passed down quiet faith through faithful generations. Their memory was not inscribed in monuments, but in lives lived rightly. As time passed, the contrast between the two lineages sharpened with every generation. Cain's daughters adorned themselves with ornaments and cosmetics, gifts taught by the fallen angels. Seth's daughters clothed themselves in virtue, choosing modesty over allure. Cain's sons took pride in forging weapons and building fortresses. Seth's sons remained with the soil, tending flocks, guiding the earth gently rather than conquering it. The difference wasn't in capability, it was in posture. One lineage looked inward for power and salvation. The other lifted its eyes toward heaven. Then came Enosh, the son of Seth, and with him a turning point in human history. His name meant frailty or mortal, a reminder of man's smallness before the vastness of God. During Enosh's lifetime, humanity began to publicly call upon the name of the Lord. This wasn't the solitary communion Adam had once shared in Eden. It wasn't Cain's fearful confession after his fall. This was something new, communal worship, organized and intentional. A recognition that human strength was not enough, that guidance was needed from beyond. It marked the first great movement of faith, not born from power, but from weakness. From the sons of Seth came a quiet resistance to the corruption that grew louder every day. Their voices may have been drowned out by the noise of bronze and war, but they endured. Because in a world spiraling toward judgment, the quiet faithful were the ones who still remembered how to listen. The sons of Seth cultivated a culture rooted in remembrance. They passed down stories, not of conquest or legendary battles, but of Eden's quiet beauty, of the fall from innocence, and of the ancient promise whispered in grief that one day, a descendant of Eve would rise to crush the serpent's head. Their tales were not filled with fireworks or heroic feats like those sung in the streets of Cain's cities. These were humble narratives, focused not on human glory, but on divine relationship, stories that preserved the memory of all that humanity had lost and the fragile hope of what might yet be restored. Their names alone spoke volumes. Canaan meant possession, not of land nor wealth, but of belonging to something higher. It hinted that these people saw themselves as God's treasured acquisition, claimed not by might, but by divine love. Mahalalel bore the meaning praise of God, reflecting a generation that found its worth not in worldly success, but in adoration of the eternal. While Cain's descendants surged into cities, forging bronze and building empires, the sons of Seth remained shepherds and farmers, not from lack of skill or ambition, but because they had found sacredness in simplicity. In the growth of their flocks, in the bounty of their fields, in the changing wind and the rhythm of rain, they perceived the very hand of God. They did not require towers to proclaim their worth. Their greatness lay quietly in communion with the divine. From this line came Jared, and from Jared came Enoch, his life representing the very pinnacle of what Seth's descendants could become. In stark contrast to his namesake in Cain's line, who had a city built to memorialize him, this Enoch built something eternal, a life so attuned to heaven that he bypassed death altogether. Enoch walked with God in such depth and intimacy that the separation between heaven and earth grew thin around him. He was shown visions not born of rebellion or secret knowledge passed down by fallen angels, but visions granted directly from the throne of God. He saw the future, glimpsed coming judgment, and held in his heart prophecies of redemption. The contrast between the two Enochs could not have been sharper. One was immortalized by brick and stone, a monument doomed to decay. The other was immortalized by divine favor, his name carried into eternity. One was a monument to human ambition, the other, a testimony to holy relationship. Cain's city showed what humanity could build with its own hands. But Enoch's walk with God revealed what humanity could become when it surrendered completely to its creator. Enoch's visions were not abstract, they were warnings. He saw the corruption spreading like wildfire across the earth as the sons of God began to take wives from the daughters of men. He watched the rise of the Nephilim and the violence they unleashed upon the land. He understood that divine patience had limits. His voice rose in warning, though few heeded it. Yet among the sons of Seth, his words were preserved, cherished, held like a candle in the dark. Enoch's son was Methuselah, whose life would span 969 years, longer than any human before or since. His name, some say, meant, "When he dies, it shall come," hinting at the flood that would arrive in the wake of his final breath. Whether or not the translation holds, Methuselah's long life stretched like a bridge between the era of the fathers and the day of reckoning. He was a living reminder that even when judgment draws near, mercy still lingers. Through all the growing chaos, the sons of Seth remained distinct. They continued to offer sacrifices. They continued to call upon the name of the Lord. They refused to measure success by the standards of their neighbors. But the pressure was unrelenting. The cities of Cain sparkled with comfort, with innovation, with beauty and seduction. The daughters of Cain were not only alluring, they were skilled, brilliant, captivating. Slowly, inevitably, the lines between the two families began to fade. The sons of God, those descended from Seth, began to see the daughters of men with new eyes. What had once been forbidden now seemed desirable. What had once been holy now seemed overly rigid. One compromise at a time, separation gave way to mixture. It wasn't a single fall, but a slow slide, a steady erosion of distinction that eventually led to ruin. Lamech of Seth's line, a different Lamech than the boastful killer among Cain's descendants, named his son Noah, praying that this child would bring relief from the curse that weighed so heavily on the world. Noah's name meant rest or comfort, and it captured a generation's desperate longing for peace. The earth groaned. Even the righteous were tired. Noah became the last bright flame in a dimming world. He was the final chance for Seth's legacy to shine before the storm. In his simple worship, in his unwavering obedience, he carried forward the seed of righteousness that had first been planted in Eden's soil. He was not perfect. The scriptures are clear that he was righteous in his generation, not flawless. But he was faithful. He remembered God when others forgot. He walked in reverence while others raged. He prayed when others scoffed. He hoped while the rest gave themselves over to despair. The tragedy of the antediluvian age was not just that Cain's lineage had fallen so far. It was that Seth's descendants had failed to remain separate. The daughters of Cain were radiant, but the sons of Seth were called to find their beauty in the holiness of God. The cities of Cain were fortified and grand, but Seth's line was meant to find its safety beneath divine wings. Cain's knowledge was deep, but Seth's wisdom was to begin in the fear of the Lord. When the flood came, only Noah and his household endured. They carried more than just life into the ark. They carried a memory, a promise, a lineage of trust. In their obedience, the quiet story of Seth did not end. It sailed forward, on wooden beams sealed by faith, into a new world waiting to be born. The human race emerged from the floodwaters, carrying only faint echoes of what it once meant to walk in communion with God. The new world that arose faced the same ancient dilemmas that had tested the sons of Seth and the daughters of Cain. Those timeless choices, between submission to divine will and the pull of rebellion, between humility and pride, would resurface generation after generation. What can we learn from the sons of Seth? Their path, though quieter, offers a profound alternative to the allure of self-glorification. Their lives point to the possibility of humble worship, steadfast service, and patient trust in God's timing. Their story, while less dazzling than the exploits of Cain's daughters, holds equal weight. It reveals that the unassuming road of righteousness, though it may lack the thrill of rebellion's wide path, leads to life, blessing, and the presence of God, rather than death, judgment, or exile. The archetype of the daughters of Cain did not vanish with the receding waters. They endured, woven into humanity's religious imagination, shaping how we perceive the interplay of divine and human, knowledge and wisdom, beauty and peril. Their narrative became a lens through which spiritual thinkers across ages interpreted the struggles of each generation. Early Christian writers saw in them a cautionary tale about the seductive pull of worldly beauty and success. They embodied the temptation to chase material fulfillment over spiritual devotion. Church fathers wielded their story to urge believers to shun the enticements of secular culture, choosing instead the narrow path of righteousness over the broad allure of temporal glory. Augustine, the towering theologian of the early church, framed the daughters of Cain within his vision of two cities. The city of God and the city of man. Cain's city of Enoch stood as the earthly city, rooted in human pride and ambition, while Seth's line represented the heavenly city, grounded in love for God and neighbor. The daughters of Cain were citizens of the earthly realm, beautiful, accomplished, yet fixated on fleeting values rather than eternal truths. In contrast, Gnostic traditions, rejected as heretical by the early church, reimagined the daughters as bearers of divine insight, rebels against a stifling cosmic order. In some Gnostic texts, the forbidden knowledge they gained from the Watchers was not sin but liberating truth, concealed by envious spiritual powers. In medieval Christianity, the daughters of Cain became potent symbols and allegories of the soul's battle between virtue and vice, holiness and temptation. Their beauty, which once captivated the Watchers, came to represent the seductive force of sin itself. Their destruction in the flood served as a stark reminder that no earthly beauty or achievement could withstand divine judgment. The Renaissance, however, brought fresh perspectives. Humanist scholars, captivated by the notion of divine knowledge, saw the daughters as early exemplars of human potential. Some viewed them as tragic figures, punished for pursuing knowledge that was rightfully theirs. Others hailed them as trailblazers of civilization, their contributions unfairly maligned by religious tradition. The Protestant Reformation shifted the focus back to human depravity and original sin. Reformed theologians pointed to the daughters of Cain as vivid illustrations of humanity's bent toward rebellion and corruption. Even the most gifted and beautiful among us, they argued, could fall into sin when turning from God's will. Their story underscored the necessity of divine grace and the peril of relying on human achievement. The Enlightenment, by contrast, recast the daughters as emblems of progress in the quest for knowledge. The forbidden arts they received from the Watchers were reimagined as the seeds of science, technology, and civilization. Far from being punished for rebellion, they were seen as martyrs of human advancement, struck down by religious superstition rather than divine justice. Romantic literature of the 18th and 19th centuries embraced the daughters of Cain as tragic figures of exquisite beauty, destroyed by forces beyond their control. Poets like Byron and Shelley saw in them symbols of the human spirit's noble struggle against cosmic injustice. Their rebellion against divine authority was reframed as a courageous pursuit of freedom and self-determination. In the 20th century, Jungian analysts interpreted the daughters as archetypes of the feminine psyche. Their pursuit of forbidden knowledge reflected the soul's yearning for wholeness, while their destruction in the flood symbolized the dangers of suppressing the shadow aspects of personality. Feminist theology has reclaimed the daughters of Cain as icons of women's fight for equality and recognition. In this view, they were not seductresses or rebels, but women who dared to seek knowledge and power in a patriarchal world. Their punishment was not divine justice, but a reflection of masculine fear of feminine strength. Their beauty and achievements were gifts to be celebrated, not dangers to be shunned. Liberation theology, similarly, sees in the daughters examples of the oppressed seeking justice. Their quest for forbidden knowledge mirrors the rightful aspirations of marginalized peoples to break free from unjust systems. Their destruction in the flood symbolizes how powerful interests crush those who challenge the status quo. New Age spirituality has embraced the daughters of Cain as embodiments of the divine feminine. They represent ancient wisdom suppressed by patriarchal religion but now being rediscovered and honored. Their union with the Watchers symbolizes the fusion of spiritual and material realms, a harmony that New Age practitioners strive to achieve. Meanwhile, contemporary evangelical Christianity continues to use the daughters as warnings against the dangers of secular culture. They embody the temptation to prioritize beauty, achievement, and knowledge over a relationship with God, urging believers to remain distinct from worldly values. In popular culture, the daughters of Cain live on as archetypes of dangerous beauty and forbidden knowledge. They appear in novels, films, and television shows, their stories endlessly adapted to reflect the concerns of each era. Yet across all interpretations, one truth endures. The daughters of Cain encapsulate something essential about the human condition. They embody the eternal tension between submission and rebellion, between accepting limits and pushing beyond them, between finding meaning in divine relationship and seeking fulfillment through human effort. Their story resonates because these choices remain ever-present, shaping the spiritual journey of every generation. Far from being relics of ancient history, the daughters of Cain are a contemporary reality, as relevant to the struggles of the 21st century as they were to the ancient world. The legacy of Cain's daughters casts long shadows across human culture, their images surfacing in literature and art whenever creators explore themes of beauty, knowledge, rebellion, and divine judgment. Their story became a wellspring for artists seeking to capture humanity's complex relationship with power, wisdom, and the divine. In medieval illuminated manuscripts, the daughters were depicted as beautiful yet perilous women, their serene faces betraying hints of forbidden knowledge. These symbolic portrayals often showed them receiving wisdom from the Watchers or in domestic scenes that underscored their role as mothers of a doomed lineage. Renaissance painters found in the daughters subjects that bridged sacred and secular art. They could depict stunning women while framing their work as religious caution. Nama, renowned for her beauty, became a favorite subject, her allure offering artists a chance to celebrate physical perfection while warning of its fleeting nature. These paintings portrayed her as a figure of tragic beauty, her expression mingling enchantment with the weight of her fate. The Romantic movement of the 18th and 19th centuries reimagined the daughters as rebels against divine authority, noble in their defiance. Poets like Byron and Shelley transformed them from cautionary figures into tragic heroes, kindred spirits who faced destruction for their independence. William Blake's mystical poetry and art re-envisioned the daughters as symbols of the creative imagination. In his mythology, they represented the artistic spirit that dared to challenge convention and forge new beauty. Their union with the Watchers symbolized the fusion of inspiration and technique, the divine spark of creativity. Their destruction in the flood reflected society's tendency to crush those who think and create differently. Gothic literature of the 19th century found in the daughters ideal subjects for exploring forbidden knowledge and dangerous beauty. They appeared as mysterious women with otherworldly allure and ancient wisdom, their knowledge leading seekers to ruin or madness. Pre-Raphaelite painters of Victorian England were drawn to the daughters as figures who blended medieval spirituality with Renaissance sensuality. Paintings like Dante Gabriel Rossetti's depictions of fatal women drew heavily on their archetype, even when portraying other subjects. Symbolist poets and artists of the late 19th century saw the daughters as emblems of the soul's quest for forbidden knowledge, their beauty embodying the aesthetic ideal and their destruction reflecting the cost of pursuing truth. Modernist writers like James Joyce and T.S. Eliot used the daughters to symbolize the fragmentation of modern consciousness, their story offering a framework for understanding the spiritual crises of the contemporary world. Feminist artists and writers have reinterpreted the daughters as pioneers who sought knowledge and power in a world that denied both to women. Their beauty was recast as empowering, their knowledge as essential, their destruction as patriarchal oppression rather than divine justice. Contemporary fantasy literature embraces the daughters as archetypal wise women or sorceresses, wielding ancient knowledge and magical power. Their stories explore modern concerns about technology, gender, and spiritual meaning. Visual artists continue to draw inspiration from the daughters, their images appearing in paintings, sculptures, and digital art that celebrate their strength and independence. In popular culture, the daughters of Cain appear in films, television shows, and video games as archetypes of dangerous beauty and forbidden knowledge. They embody the femme fatale, the wise woman, or the rebel who challenges authority and pays a steep price. Music, too, has been profoundly influenced by their archetype, weaving their themes of beauty, rebellion, and tragedy into songs and compositions. From Bach to modern composers, the daughters of Cain have inspired a wealth of musical creations, their story woven into operas, symphonies, and popular songs. These works capture the tragic allure of their narrative, exploring themes of temptation, beauty, and divine judgment, while highlighting their enduring relevance to our time. The influence of the daughters of Cain extends far beyond explicit references in literature and art. They have become archetypal figures, shaping how creators grapple with the complexities of beauty, knowledge, rebellion, and divine authority. Their tale offers a framework for understanding the intricate dance between human ambition and divine will, between the thirst for knowledge and the necessity of wisdom. What makes the daughters of Cain such compelling subjects for artists is their embodiment of paradox. They are at once beautiful yet perilous, wise yet foolish, powerful yet ultimately powerless. They mirror the human condition in its fullest complexity, reflecting the tension between our deepest desires and our truest needs, between what we can achieve and what we ought to pursue. Their legacy in literature and art transcends the past, speaking to the present and future. They continue to inspire creators who seek to probe the eternal questions they represent, offering a lens through which to examine the spiritual and moral challenges of contemporary life, the choices that shape our existence, and the consequences of our most profound aspirations and ambitions. The daughters of Cain are more than mere characters from an ancient tale. They have become symbols of the human spirit itself, embodying its beauty and danger, its wisdom and folly, its strength and vulnerability. They remind us that every generation faces the same fundamental choice, between submission to divine order and the lure of rebellion, between accepting our limits and striving to transcend them, between finding meaning in communion with the divine and chasing fulfillment through human achievement. Their story is a timeless reminder that these decisions define not only our lives but the world we create. The tale of the daughters of Cain concludes where it began, with a choice. Radiant and brilliant, they stood at the crossroads of human destiny and made their decision. They reached for forbidden knowledge, embraced dangerous power, and loved beings beyond their reach. Their choices shaped not only their own fate but the course of the entire world. We have journeyed with them through their rise and fall, from the founding of the first city to the engulfing waters of the flood. We have seen how their beauty captivated angels and how their wisdom laid the foundations of civilization. We have watched them pass on to their children the arts of war and peace, creation and destruction, and we have witnessed their final moments as the waves rose, swallowing their lineage beneath the deluge. Yet their story did not end with the flood. It endured in the myths and legends of every culture that followed, shaping humanity's understanding of the relationship between mortal and divine, knowledge and wisdom, beauty and danger. The daughters of Cain transcended their historical existence to become enduring symbols of the human struggle between submitting to the cosmic order and seeking to rise above it. Their legacy is etched in every city that stretches toward the heavens, in every soul that craves forbidden knowledge, in every heart that chooses pride over humility. It manifests in the beauty that both enchants and destroys, in the wisdom that elevates yet corrupts, in the love that creates and condemns. The daughters of Cain walk among us still, not as flesh and blood, but as possibilities, as choices, as warnings, and as inspirations. They remind us that humanity perpetually stands at a crossroads between two paths. One path leads toward communion with the divine, toward humble submission to the cosmic order, toward finding meaning in our rightful place within creation. The other path veers toward independence from divine authority, toward the reckless pursuit of knowledge and power, toward the ambition to become gods ourselves. The daughters of Cain chose the latter path, and their choice brought both marvels and horrors to the world. They bestowed upon humanity the gifts of civilization, cities, technology, art, music, knowledge, and power. But they also bequeathed the curse of unchecked ambition, the desire to transcend our limits, to know what should remain unknown, to love what should remain unloved. Their story is, at its core, a meditation on the cost of knowledge and the price of beauty. It asks whether there are truths that should stay hidden, boundaries that should not be crossed, loves that should not be pursued. It suggests that the greatest gifts can become the gravest curses when wielded without wisdom, when they draw us away from our Creator rather than toward Him. The flood that ended their lineage was intended as a new beginning, a chance for humanity to start anew with the lessons of the past firmly in mind. Yet the echoes of their story reveal that the same choices, the same temptations, and the same potential for creation and destruction would resurface in every generation. Noah's family carried the seeds of humanity's future in their blood, but they also bore the memory of what had come before. The daughters of Cain were gone, but the questions they raised lingered. How do we balance the pursuit of knowledge with the need for wisdom? How do we seek beauty without being consumed by it? How do we create without being overtaken by pride in our creations? These questions offer no simple answers, for they touch the very essence of what it means to be human.